This lawyer went crazy and decided to run over people. And he was the fake lawyer who somehow never lost defending his clients in court. What else were some of the wildest crimes that we uncovered in 2024? Let's get right to it in this marathon video. What are some of the weirdest crimes that actually happen? Let's find out, starting with number 6, the voices. Beatrice Bijou, a Florida personal injury attorney, shocked everyone when she intentionally rammed her Kia into 4 people outside the Fresh Market in Stuart, Florida. Caught on security cameras, she didn't even try to slow down, claiming voices in her head urged her to end lives. It was like something out of a twisted movie. Witnesses described how the car hopped the curb, slamming them into a wall. One victim was even airlifted to the hospital. Bijou didn't stop there either. She reversed at high speed, attempting to hit another person before finally parking at the Stuart Police Department. Bijou didn't even try to deny what she did either. Instead, she straight up told the officer that her inner voices had commanded the carnage. As it turns out, she had been off some meds she was prescribed for quite some time and was playing a dangerous game with her bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. Despite pleading not guilty, the evidence was stacked against her. The court didn't buy her story, and neither did the Florida bar, who promptly disbarred her. But here's the kicker. Despite facing serious charges, Bijou managed to wriggle out of the whole mess by pleading insanity. The court found her mentally unfit to stand trial and shipped her off to a facility run by the Department of Children and Families. This wasn't some one-time slip-up either. As it turns out, Bijou had a history with her mental health. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia back in 2019. There's nothing funny about mental disorders, and while meds help, sadly they're not a cure. And when people unexpectedly discontinue their meds, they often get tragic results. Although she was found not guilty by reason of insanity, it doesn't mean she just gets to walk away. She's going to be institutionalized for a long time until she's no longer considered a threat to society. Given her history, that could be a long time. Number 5, the rat scam. UK couple Debbie and Ronnie Williams got hit with a crazy scam that'll make you scratch your head and hide your cheese. One evening, Debbie comes home from work to find a bunch of dead rats on her doorstep. Then, a lady shows up, claiming to be from the Environment Agency and talking about a rat invasion. Of course, Debbie was a bit freaked out by the situation, so she gave the woman her number, and a short while later, a guy calls her and tells her that there's definitely a rat problem and that she should check her backyard, where she found more rats. Then the guy, in a classic scammer move, swoops in for the rescue, saying he'll take care of that rat problem and clean up the mess for half the price of a professional contractor. Luckily, Debbie realized it was a scam and dealt with the manufactured problem on her own. Ronnie, being a local member of the city council, wasn't about to let this slide. He sounded the alarm, warning folks about these lowlifes trying to pull a fast one. And guess what? The police confirmed that it was a full-blown scam and that they had caught the rat dumpers. Now, the police are urging everyone to stay sharp and report any rat-related stuff. And good for Debbie for not falling for it, right? We probably would have fallen for it, and then signed up for whatever subscription service they were offering. Isn't leaving rats on the doorstep a mafia thing too? Maybe Debbie and Ronnie were talking a little bit too much. They're lucky they didn't find any fish wrapped in newspaper instead. Number 4, the wing heist. Paul and Joshua Rojek of Syracuse, New York, decided to team up and go full throttle on a wild chicken wing heist, swiping a whopping $41,000 worth of those tasty wings from the restaurant they both worked at. Imagine, father-son bonding time turned into a full-blown crime spree. Paul, at 56, and Joshua, at 33, were working as cooks at Twin Trees 2 restaurant. So, what was their slick move to get that many wings? Ordering the wings from the restaurant supplier, but then conveniently misplacing the receipts. Then they allegedly flipped those wings, selling them off at a discount to other restaurants or even straight up out of the back of a truck. Yeah, you heard that right. People from other restaurants were buying wings from the back of a pickup truck, which sounds about as safe as the free candy you get from Vans. Now, you might think they could have just devoured all those wings themselves, but let's be real. That's a lot of wings for two guys. These two got caught probably apparently, because, let's face it, trying to offload that many wings under the radar is like trying to sneak a herd of elephants through a nursery full of sleeping babies. So fast forward to the consequences. Paul got a solid 1 to 3 years in the clink, while Joshua lucked out with 5 years of probation and only 60 days of weekends behind bars. Why the lighter sentence for the son? Well, apparently the old man was the mastermind behind the operation. But hey, they weren't off the hook yet. The judge ordered them both to cough up the entire $41,000 to the restaurant and its insurance company. Number 3. Cooked up records. Jeanette Breen from Long Island, New York, got herself into a real mess by cooking up some fake immunization records for roughly 1,500 kids who visited her at Baldwin Midwifery. Instead of giving them the real deal vaccines that she was supposed to do, she handed out some homeopathic pellets like they were candy at a parade. This lady was slapped with a hefty fine of $300,000 for messing with the state's immunization registry law and putting a lot of people at risk. What's even crazier was that she doled out over 12,000 phony immunizations during a stretch from July 2020 to December 2022, time when public health was on everyone's mind. The health department honchos weren't having any of it. Dr. James McDonald, the state health commissioner, rightly pointed out that messing with vaccine records is playing with folks' lives. This wasn't some one-off thing either. Breen had been playing fast and loose with shot records for a while. Back in 2017, she tried to swing an exemption for a patient who needed a flu shot for work. She barely even knew the person, but apparently she has some sort of agenda. Breen has already coughed up $150,000 of the current $300,000 she owes for her more recent crime. She was put out on probation, and if she keeps her nose clean, she might dodge the other half. However, she can't ever give vaccines again or peek at the state's immunization records again. Her lawyer's spinning it like she's some kind of hero, though, saying that she's been a great midwife and is at the end of her career ready to move on with her life, and as far as she was concerned, the matter is done and over with. No matter where someone falls on the vaccine issue, what's wrong is simply taking other people's lives into their own hands and choosing for them. Did Breen get her medical certification from Dr. Jenny McCarthy or something? As a PSA, don't take medical advice from Dr. Jenny McCarthy. Number 2. The worst outcome. A Taiwanese man known only as Chang tried to pull off an insurance scam, claiming he lost both legs in a frostbite accident in order to pocket over $1 million. But it was all a big, fat lie. Chang cooked up this scheme with his buddy Lau, who strapped him into a chair and dunked his legs in dry ice and then, cut them off. The sad thing is that he did this for some quick cash because apparently Chang owed some serious money to some serious people. So Chang goes ahead and applies for insurance payouts from not 1, not 2, but 8 different policies, totaling over $1 million. He even got a measly $7,000 from one company before they figured out that something wasn't quite right. But the whole thing really fell apart when the insurance companies noticed that Chang bought those policies suspiciously close to his accident. So insurance investigators dug a little deeper and found out that the temperatures on the night of his supposed scooter crash, the accident he claimed to have, weren't even cold enough for frostbite. Plus, his injuries were way too symmetrical, which is a red flag in the world of frostbite. It's like they say, the devil's in the details. Long story short, Chang and his partner in crime Lau were caught. They faced charges for fraud and attempted fraud. And even though it was a clearly dumb thing to do, and obviously not well thought out, Chang was probably pressured into doing it and not thinking clearly. So we can't be too hard on this guy. He's already lost both his legs. Number 1. The Note. Las Vegas resident Gino Anthony Julia got himself in a truckload of trouble for the grim demise of his roommate, Aaron Chavez. He's been accused of taking out his roommate in a connection to a bizarre Ponzi scheme fallout. Julian was caught after a desert mishap when his vehicle, with a burned and partially buried body just 10 feet away, got stuck, and he called a tow truck for help. Julian was nabbed in August of 2023 by the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Sheriff's Department. At first, he spun a tale about his involvement, claiming he was merely a courier for some shadowy figures out of Miami, ferrying duffel bags for cash. But things took a macabre turn when he claimed he discovered a random body wrapped up in his Mercedes with a note telling him to, quote, take care of it, like he's a character in GTA or something. His job, as he saw it, was to dispose of the body in the California desert, a task he undertook with a peculiar blend of incompetence and diligence, dousing the body in gasoline and setting it on fire. But Julian's story unraveled with revelations about Chavez's dodgy dealings. Chavez had raked in cash through Ponzi schemes, essentially playing financial hot potato with investors' money. Two guys duped by Chavez into investing $25,000 in protein cookies grew suspicious as Chavez fed them lies while flaunting a lavish lifestyle on social media, in a classic case of living large on ill-gotten gains. Then came the evidence of Julian's and Chavez's fractious relationship, spilling into physical altercations and ominous texts, hinting at a very unhappy ending. Julian's digital footprints included videos of him hitting Chavez and chillingly getting rid of his body. Texts found on Julian's phone also hinted at a need to deep clean their apartment, a nod to their grim activities. What sealed Julian's fate, though, was the tow truck's driver's discovery. His alert to authorities led to Julian's arrest, with his initial fibs to officers quickly falling apart under scrutiny. Chavez's passing was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head, with a scene straight out of a crime drama found at Julian's apartment, bloodstains and all. As Julian awaits trial, his tales of being an unwitting participant in Chavez's demise hang in the air. Julian remains a prime suspect, with the legal principle of innocence until proven guilty hanging over the proceedings, but the court of public opinion might not be so impartial. And when Julian called the tow truck driver, why did he leave the evidence of a crime out in plain sight? Dude, bury it first at least, and maybe further than 10 feet from the road. It's like he wasn't even trying because he thought the tow truck driver was going to see the body and just be cool with it. What are some of the weirdest crimes that people will actually do? Let's find out, starting with number 8, the amazing fake lawyer. A man in Kenya, practicing law under the name Brian Mwenda, made headlines for allegedly winning all 26 of his cases despite having no legal training whatsoever. Which would be cool if he didn't steal Mwenda's identity. This astonishing revelation led to his arrest by the Rapid Action Team of the Nairobi branch of the Law Society of Kenya. The man had stolen the identity of a real lawyer named Brian Mwenda Nkwiga. He accessed the society's portal and tampered with the account details of the real Brian Nkwiga, uploading his own picture and claiming to be trained in law. The scheme was discovered when the real Brian Nkwiga attempted to access his account and realized that some details had been changed without his knowledge. So he alerted the Law Society, sparking an investigation into the imposter's activities. While the case caused outrage among legal officials, some expressed admiration for the imposter's skills. Kenya's Central Organization of Trade Unions described him as a brilliant young mind who succeeded without traditional qualifications. Support for the imposter also came from Mike Sonko, Nairobi's controversial former governor, who posted a video with the man on social media. In the video, the imposter thanked people for the support he had received and vowed to clear up any misunderstandings surrounding his identity. However, the director of public prosecutions in Kenya, Renson Muleli Inganga, said that the imposter may face prosecution for his actions. He instructed the Inspector General of the National Police Service to conduct an investigation into the matter, citing the increasing number of unqualified individuals pretending to be advocates of the High Court of Kenya. It'll definitely be interesting to see how well he does defending himself in court. We're not advocating to run any scams here, but we're not gonna lie. It's a bit impressive that he was that successful doing a job he clearly wasn't officially qualified for. 26 straight cases. Number 7. Unhappy endings. In Garland County, Arkansas, Leroy Martin Homan, an ex-con on parole at the time of his crime, found himself back behind bars after pleading guilty to robbing two men while they were receiving massages. The ordeal began when a local man responded to an online massage advertisement and arranged to meet the masseuse, later identified as Karen Suzanne Chadwick, at her place. Little did he know he was walking into a trap. Chadwick directed him to an upstairs bathroom under the guise of cleaning up before the massage. Once he finished with his shower, he noticed his clothes were missing. When he left the bathroom, he was confronted by Leroy Homan, who pretended to have a firearm in his pants. Homan detained the victim while Chadwick rifled through his vehicle, making off with a score totaling $850, including CDs and prescription sunglasses. They must have been really excited about those CDs too. Does anyone even have a CD player anymore? Just days later, another man fell victim to the same scheme. Responding to a similar online ad, he met Chadwick at her house and was directed to the same upstairs bathroom. Once again, the man realized his clothes were missing, and when he walked out, he saw Leroy Homan brandishing what appeared to be a firearm. Same as before, Leroy detained the victim while Chadwick robbed his vehicle, this time taking an iPad, cash, a debit card, and a lottery ticket, totaling $665. The victims, expecting a relaxing massage, instead found themselves at the mercy of a duo engaged in a bizarre heist operation. The authorities swiftly moved in on the perpetrators. Both victims positively identified Chadwick as the woman who had lured them to the apartment. Further investigation led to the apprehension of Homan, whose description matched that provided by the victims. In court, Homan, who was already on parole, pleaded guilty. His sentencing resulted in a 10-year prison term on each count to run concurrently. The whole thing, especially stealing their clothes, isn't only criminal but also super weird. The dumb thing though is, why on earth would you rob someone in your own apartment? Like, there was no way Homan was getting away with this one, as if the guy isn't going to remember where he was. Number 6. The really excited nurse. At Erlanger Hospital in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a woman impersonated a nurse and attempted to discharge two patients. Lydia Kate Brock faced a slew of charges stemming from the incident. Brock, disguised in a hospital gown, entered the rooms of two patients and claimed to be their nurse. In one instance, she told an 85-year-old man that he was being discharged and began removing his monitoring equipment and IV. Later, she approached a 70-year-old woman, telling her she was being released, and attempted to remove her medical equipment. Fortunately, the quick intervention of family members prevented any further harm to the patients. Of course, Brock got arrested. And this wasn't Brock's first brush with the law either. Previous incidents involved allegations of contraband-related offenses imposing as a nurse at another hospital. The most bizarre part of the story was that Brock kept insisting she had a nursing license. While online records initially showed no registered nurse with her name in Tennessee, it later emerged that she had obtained a nursing license under her maiden name. Why someone with valid credentials would resort to impersonating a nurse and engaging in such dangerous behavior is beyond us. The motive behind Brock's actions remain unclear. Was it a misguided attempt to rekindle a career in nursing? Or was it driven by some other intention, such as substance-seeking behavior? The irony of the situation is that while so many people eagerly await the end of their shift to clock out and relax, Brock was apparently eager to get back on the clock. Number 5. Bills to pay. Texas woman Cassandra Gutierrez made headlines after going after her boyfriend with a knife on Thanksgiving Day during an argument over money. The incident occurred following a night of drinking at a bar, after which Gutierrez and her boyfriend Richard Delgado returned to her apartment. Apparently, tensions escalated when Gutierrez accused Delgado of not contributing enough to their household expenses. But the confrontation escalated when Gutierrez allegedly grabbed the kitchen knife and, we'll just call it, went after Delgado. Despite the severity of the altercation, Delgado managed to escape the apartment. Law enforcement officers responded swiftly to the scene, discovering Delgado near the leasing office injured, and a trail that led from the apartment door to where Delgado was found. Delgado sustained injuries to his neck, hand, leg, and back, but thankfully survived. He was promptly transported to Brooke Army Medical Center and was reported to be in stable condition. In his statement to the police, Delgado identified Gutierrez as the perpetrator, and she was promptly arrested. Number 4. Flying for crime. Two Chilean women, Rosa Dotes Perez and Francisca Santana, went on an extraordinary journey from Chile to the UK with only one goal in mind: burglary. Named the Burglary Tourists, they ventured into the heart of Cheshire, breaking into a luxurious mansion worth £3 million. With the aid of a male accomplice, Jean-Paul Pizarro Carrasco, who was also from Chile, they orchestrated a meticulously planned heist. Their MO involved damaging CCTV cameras, snatching designer handbags, jewelry, and other high-end items, then fleeing the scene. However, their criminal escapade was short-lived, and the trio was apprehended by the police after automatic number plate recognition alerted them to the fake number displayed on their rental car. The court proceedings shed light on the magnitude of their crime. Dotes Perez, Santana, and Carrasco faced the music and were sentenced accordingly. Dotes Perez received a 20-month jail term, while Santana was confined to a young offender institution for 16 months. Carrasco, the orchestrator of the operation, was handed a 20-month sentence. The judge pointed out the psychological toll inflicted upon the victims and the disregard for their hard-earned possessions. The impact reverberated beyond material loss, instilling fear and vulnerability in the homeowners, who no longer felt safe in their own house. The thing that leaves us scratching our heads is, who flies thousands of miles, spending a bunch of money and time just to break into a house? Usually, people go flying all over the world after they've committed crimes, not before. Number 3. Tarot readings. A Las Vegas lawyer named Stacy Takunaga found herself in the middle of an elaborate scam orchestrated by 3 individuals posing as psychics. Sherry Marks, David Marks, and Peaches Marks allegedly preyed upon Takunaga's vulnerability, ultimately conning her out of $1.5 million in assets. The deception began with the trio leaving a flyer on Takunaga's doorstep advertising a tarot card reading. Intrigued, Takunaga responded, setting the stage for the elaborate con. During the reading, Takunaga was told that her chakras were off balance. Oh, those pesky unbalanced chakras. And to fix this, she would need a chakra clearing, which costs $1,500. Takunaga was also coerced into purchasing a journal and a white singing bowl for a whopping $30,000 under the guise of spiritual cleansing. Later, she shelled out an additional $30,000 on yet another journal, all in pursuit of purportedly clearing her bad karma and being a lawyer. It's like she probably just got a ton of bad karma the minute she passed the bar, so it kinda makes sense. As the scam intensified, Takunaga's expenses skyrocketed. The psychics convinced her that she also needed to buy 2 BMWs worth $130,000 each to rid herself of the supposed evil afflicting her. The scheme took an even more absurd turn when they advised Takunaga to sleep with a mason jar filled with water under her bed. When the water mysteriously turned red overnight, the psychics claim she needed to fix the rooted evil in her bloodline. Reportedly depleting her financial resources, Takunaga handed over $500,000 from her firm's coffers and a line of credit, as well as $350,000 worth of heirloom jewelry. The scam only unraveled when her accountant discovered the suspicious transactions and alerted the authorities. Sherry Marks and David Marks faced charges of conspiracy, extortion, and obtaining money under false pretenses. Given Takunaga's professional background as a lawyer, you'd think she was smart enough to have seen what was happening. What we want to know is, since psychics are already scammers and that's somehow legal, should they have gotten in trouble for taking advantage of Takunaga? She clearly has some level of intelligence if she's a lawyer, so who's really to blame here? Let us know in the comments. Number 2. Unpaid invoice. An unnamed contractor in Dublin, Ireland, took matters into his own hands when he tore down an extension he had constructed on a homeowner's property. The incident unfolded after the homeowner allegedly refused to pay for the builder's work. The video, recorded by a concerned neighbor, showed the irate builder rolling onto the roof of the extension with a chainsaw in hand. With evident frustration, he began drilling into the roof, creating a spectacle that quickly drew the attention of the homeowners. As the shocked homeowners rushed outside to confront him, the builder defiantly continued his free demolition work, saying that this is what happens when people don't pay the bill while holding the chainsaw menacingly towards them. The builder's actions, though extreme, underscore a common issue in the construction industry: disputes over payment. Apparently, the builder had completed the extension for the homeowners, but was met with refusal when it came time to pay up. The incident gained traction after being shared on social media platforms, sparking a mix of shock, amusement, and sympathy from viewers. Some pointed out that the contractor had resorted resorted to drastic measures after unsuccessfully attempting to resolve the payment dispute through more conventional means. While the video provided entertainment for many online spectators, it also serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of settling financial matters promptly. As the old adage goes, you get what you pay for. But in this case, it seems the homeowners got a little more than they bargained for: a demolished extension and a viral video. Maybe next time they'll pay up. Number 1. Flying low. Kenneth Jones, an United Airlines pilot, found himself in a strange situation at Denver International Airport when he used an axe on a car park barrier. Frustrated by the gate's malfunction and long lines, Jones took matters into his own hands, using an axe to strike the barrier a total of 23 times until it finally gave way. Airport video footage captured the weird scene as Jones, dressed in his uniform, marched purposefully towards the gate with an axe in his hand while onlookers watched. Police later revealed that Jones had reached his breaking point, feeling overwhelmed by the delays and issues faced by airport staff and motorists alike. In any case, Jones managed to catch the attention of fellow staff members who intervened and disarmed him before police arrived. Despite the unusual nature of the incident, Jones's colleagues successfully restrained him, preventing any further damage to the barrier. The airport administration acknowledged the gate's ongoing issues, pointing out delays caused by users without the correct permits. Jones's frustration likely stemmed from witnessing multiple cars lined up at each exit gate, exasperating the situation. Jones, a seasoned pilot qualified to fly large passenger jets, faced criminal mischief charges for his actions. While he has no prior criminal record in Colorado, the incident has raised questions about his future employment and pension eligibility given his proximity to retirement age. United Airlines promptly suspended Jones pending an internal investigation into the matter. Maybe he shouldn't have flown off the handle. There were two sides of Jimmy Zhang. He was the friend that treated the people around him to expensive trips, and the party boy who entered a bar and bought everyone a shot. The parties at his lake house were legendary, and even though he didn't have an obvious source of income, he was always flaunting his wealth. Zhang told people he got rich from the early days of crypto, but that wasn't the full story. On March 13, 2019, the Athens-Clarke County Police Department received an emergency call from Jimmy Zhang. Apparently, a thief had broken into his property by smashing a window, taking all his money, and leaving Zhang in an absolute panic. Zhang told the local police department that he was an investor in cryptocurrency and that he might have just lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in Bitcoin. It was the first crypto case that Athens police worked on, and they struggled to navigate the complex and seedy underworld that came with it. At the time, Bitcoin was still relatively new, not the buzzword it has become, so police had no clue what they were stepping into. But eventually, the police got a lead and ended up seizing a popcorn tin found in Zhang's house. And in that tin was a computer with millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin that Zhang himself had stolen. Months had passed without any leads, and Zhang grew desperate for answers, so he enlisted the help of Robin Martinelli, a private investigator. Martinelli owned her own firm, Martinelli Investigations, where she usually handled cases like cheating spouses and custody disputes. She was no expert in the crypto field, and it was one of her first times handling a case of this nature. But Zhang needed her help, so she took the job. Martinelli's focus was on finding out who broke into Zhang's house the night of the theft and identifying that person. So she studied surveillance footage from Zhang's exterior security camera and found her first potential suspect, a slender man wearing a gray hoodie. Luckily, it wasn't the Slender Man, who's like at least 50% scarier. But the less scary Slender Man, we'll call him Slender Guy, was clearly familiar with the property, and Martinelli was sure he was either one of Zhang's friends or someone who knew about his impressive Bitcoin stash. So Martinelli monitored Zhang's friends to see if she could figure out who Slender Guy was. She followed Zhang's friends around town, put trackers on their cars, monitored their social media accounts, and even performed background checks. Zhang's friends all seemed pretty superficial, and Martinelli was certain they had been taking advantage of him. Zhang refused to believe that anyone in his inner circle would steal from him, but it was no secret that being his friend came with some serious perks. He liked to treat people around him and was known to enter a bar and buy a round of drinks for everyone inside. The University of Georgia alum lived in a modest house near campus, but he liked to make big purchases. When Zhang traveled, he stayed in fancy hotels like the Waldorf Astoria, Plaza, or Ritz-Carlton. He bought clothing from designer stores like Louis Vuitton, Gucci, and Jimmy Choo, and drove around in expensive cars like his Tesla. As well as his off-campus home, he owned a lake house where he kept his jet skis, boats, and an abundance of alcohol. When the Georgia Bulldogs football team made the Rose Bowl in 2018, he flew a group of his friends to LA on a private jet. They stayed in luxury accommodations, and he even gave each of his travel companions up to $10,000 for a shopping spree on Rodeo Drive. We're sure there was at least one guy who was disappointed that there weren't no rodeos. D2 reference. You're welcome, 90s kids. But Zhang didn't have a job. He had invested in Bitcoin when it was in its infancy and mined thousands of coins. His crypto career began in 2009, and by 2019, he was pretty wealthy. And while his generosity and party lifestyle drew people to him, Martinelli grew protective over her client. For years, Zhang struggled to make friends, but by this point, he had money, and that made it easier. Martinelli believed his friendships were one-sided, with Zhang investing money and time into his inner circle only for his supposed friends to take advantage of him. But the thing was, she believed that she had found the culprit behind the lost bitcoins. It was someone that Zhang knew, but rather than being happy that Martinelli might have cracked the case, he was upset and didn't believe her. Zhang also didn't give Martinelli the full story about how he acquired so much Bitcoin in the first place. But investigators were working behind the scenes to reveal the true story behind Zhang's fortune. 7 years before Zhang's 911 call, someone had stolen 50,000 Bitcoins from the Silk Road, a site on the dark web. As one of the first crypto marketplaces, the Silk Road was basically eBay, but for illegal stuff. Over the years, as Bitcoin's value grew, the stolen crypto's value had reached $3 billion. Although investigators could track the currency's location on the blockchain, a public ledger of all transactions, they weren't able to see the fund's new owner. So investigators spent years watching the Silk Road hacker move the crypto from one account to another, waiting for the cyber criminal to make a mistake. And finally, he did. The blockchain analytics company Chain Analysis was one of the organizations that worked on the case. It traced the Silk Road Bitcoin's digital wallets and discovered that the hacker moved $800 worth of crypto into a traceable account. Unlike the other places where the cyber thief put the Bitcoin, this institution required account holders to give their real names and addresses. So, what was the account holder's name? Jimmy Zhang. 6 months after Zhang's 911 call, the IRS called the Athens Clarke County Police Department and asked for their help in proving that Zhang was guilty. The IRS Criminal Investigations Department, known as the IRSCI, contacted Athens Clarke County Police Department's head of local property and financial crimes, Lieutenant Jody Thompson. They asked Thompson about Zhang since he was familiar with Zhang's report about the home break-in. But this investigation was about a different and much larger scale Bitcoin theft. Thompson partnered with IRSCI Special Agent Trevor McAleenan and Sean Magruder, the CEO of BlockTrace. The IRS hired BlockTrace for this investigation due to its experience with deciphering complicated blockchain transactions. But before they could get a warrant to search Zhang's property, the three investigators needed to find a way to find more evidence. So, they told Zhang that they were investigating the theft he reported a few months ago and wanted to talk in person. The three men went to Zhang's lake house and pretended to be impressed with the property and asked for a tour under the guise of what seemed like general curiosity. Then, those sneaky sneaks snooped for evidence while Zhang bragged about all his expensive stuff. The officers looked through his closets, tapped on floors, and checked wood paneling to see if they could find secret compartments, like they think Zhang was Batman or something. Then, they asked him about the features of his security system, so he gave a full tutorial of all of its capabilities. You can't help but feel a little bad for this guy, right? He's all excited to show off his stuff to people who seemed interested in him, and they're just collecting evidence. After the tour, the officers asked him to explain how he got into the Bitcoin game in the first place. In 2009, the year Bitcoin was invented, Zhang had been part of a small group of early coders who developed and perfected perfected the technology. Although he was a smaller contributor than others in the group, Zhang helped the early developers find ways to reduce blockchain size. Not wanting to miss an opportunity to impress his new friends, Zhang opened his laptop and let the officers see that he had between $60 and $70 million worth of Bitcoin. This gave Thompson, McAleenan, and Magruder all the information they needed to get a federal search warrant. McAleenan eventually revealed his true identity as a special agent with the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit, not a local officer who was going to help Zhang recover some stolen crypto. At first, Zhang seemed confused, as though McAleenan was pranking him, but things got serious when law enforcement arrived. Authorities flooded the premises and searched for evidence related to the Silk Road hack. That's when they discovered a popcorn tin with a computer inside that had billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. Sniffer dogs detected electronics in a safe set in concrete beneath some basement floor tiles. Apparently, he was Batman. The safe contained precious metals and stacks of cash, but most importantly, it had actual physical Bitcoins, with the private keys engraved on the coins and a wallet with Bitcoin from the 2012 hack. And just like that, Zhang was arrested. Zhang admitted during his trial that stealing Bitcoin made him feel important. School bullies used to make his life miserable, and he always felt like an outsider until he discovered an online community that needed his computing skills. His attorney, Michael Bachner, argued that the Silk Road hack didn't cost the US government money. In fact, the government might have actually benefited from the time it took to track down Zhang. If he hadn't stolen the goods, the government would have most likely seized them in 2014, as it did with Silk Road's operator, Ross Ulbricht. At that time, Zhang's coins would have been worth $320 each, bringing the value of his Bitcoin wallet to $14 million. But since authorities didn't track down Zhang's coins until 2019, their value had ballooned to $3 billion. Zhang was worried about what would happen to Chad, his 13-year-old dog, if he went to prison, and asked the judge not to send him to jail. Sadly, Zhang didn't get his wish and received 1 year and 1 month in federal prison. Officials put measures in place to help victims of the hack get their Bitcoin back, but nobody came forward to claim the loot. Most Silk Road users were contraband dealers or involved in other criminal activity, so they probably didn't want to identify themselves to the government. And police never were able to track down the slender guy that stole Zhang's Bitcoin in 2019. He's still out there. Jimmy Zhang is pretty far from a hardened criminal. It's tough to really feel bad for the people he stole from. But he would have gotten away with what was nearly a perfect crime had he not been robbed himself and called the police. That, and when Jimmy slipped up the one time transferring a small amount of Bitcoin to an online exchange whom he had given his identity to when he set up an account. Lastly, for those of you wondering, his dog was okay and stayed with a friend. It's the evening in June of 2010, and a DEA sniffer dog has found something suspicious in the van of one of LA's top models. The dog is now sitting patiently in front of the van, and people in the know that this means only one thing. The dog has found something. The van is part of a 3-vehicle convoy that also had a Suburban and an Escalade. The convoy is clearly luxurious and is the type that could only belong to someone important. And the important person in this case is Lisette Lee. Lee immediately gets out of the van and starts shouting at the agents. She asks them if they know who she is, which is a dumb thing to say to authorities because either they know who she is and they don't care, or they don't know who she is and they still don't care. But whether or not they knew doesn't matter right now. What matters now is what the dog found. Later that evening, the police unload 13 heavy suitcases from the convoy. Lisette is asked to explain what's in the suitcases, and she explains that she's bringing supplies to a horse farm, which was total nonsense. Then, later that night, she confesses that the contents of the suitcases have to do with weapons and money laundering or something. But even if that isn't true, the suitcases are all filled to the brim with devil's lettuce, and Ms. Lisette Lee, who claims she's a Vogue model / Korean pop star / Samsung heiress, is actually a budding illegal substances transporter who regularly transports over 500 pounds of illicit substances from California to Ohio. The police searched her purse and they found spicy snow, $6,500 in cash, and a ledger for the volume of weight she was moving. Lisette Lee, the famous Beverly Hills celebrity model, had been busted. The only question that remained was how she even got there in the first place. Before she was arrested for smuggling weight on a private jet from California to Ohio, Lisette Lee led a pretty extraordinary life. She was a model, an actress who played herself in certain cameos, an heiress, and had money to spend. She had quite the childhood, too. She claimed that she had gone to LA prep school Buckley. This was the same school that Paris Hilton went to, and Lisette told everyone who cared to listen that Hilton herself had begged for Lisette's friendship when they were at the school. She also said she had met Kim Kardashian there as well and thought nothing of her because Kim was what she described as a fat Armenian. Lisette, who also said that she had attended a London finishing school and then had rounded up her studies at Harvard. All of that is pretty impressive. But Lisette isn't quite done impressing you yet. She also said that she was an heiress to Samsung on her mother's side and said that her father's family had founded Sony and also owned a chain of very successful casinos in Japan. She then said that she was a very successful pop star in Asia, but her powerful and disapproving parents had blocked all evidence of her performances from being seen in the United States. On her MySpace page, also known as Old Facebook, she had luxury cars, jewelry, and everything else you think a model of her caliber would have. She had 2 Bentleys, a purse-sized lapdog, lived in a $1.2 million West Hollywood apartment, and called herself the Korean Paris Hilton, even though they weren't friends. She also claimed that she dated Cristiano Ronaldo, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Channing Tatum. Our heiress Lisette went shopping at the best places, ate the best food, wore the most luxurious clothes, and for all practical purposes, lived up to her title as the Korean Paris Hilton. The only difference was that Paris Hilton's actual name was Paris Hilton, and Lisette Lee was living what could be generally regarded as a false life. Lisette wasn't just extremely flashy and wealthy. She was also extremely sociopathic. At the end of her legal travails, one of her closest friends told Rolling Stone that Lisette's face ought to be on the Wikipedia page for sociopath. She used everyone and anyone she could lay her hands on. This extended right from her personal relationships to the romantic relationships she cultivated. She always wanted to be the most important person in the room, and she made sure she punished anyone who didn't want that. People were drawn to her beauty and money, but they were also entranced by her unending demands for subservience. And it was made all the more entrancing by her frank inability to be cowered to by anyone. One day, one of her boyfriends, yes, for she had many such boyfriends at the same time, introduced her to record producer Bradley Spalter, who had worked with Aaron Neville and the boy band O-Town. Bradley was interested in signing her since she claimed that she was a Korean pop star, and Lisette went to the studio for a session. Once she got there, she found the most intimidating man in the room, a 300-pound upcoming rapper, and immediately tossed him her keys and asked him to park her car for her. And she made sure she called him the N-word while at it. The entire room was stunned into silence and then exploded into laughter. Bradley immediately exclaimed that she was a star. Yes, our girl Lisette Lee was a star. 4 years before she was arrested, she got a friend to introduce her to innocent-looking Miley Katie. Katie was an aspiring actress from the small town of Bremerton, Washington, and was looking for some help in the big city. Lisette started as that help, and before long, both girls became as thick as thieves. Lisette loved Katie because she was a middle-class, simple girl, new to the trappings of stardom, and Katie loved Lisette because she naively believed there was some hidden good in her. But before long, Lisette started to control Katie. The relationship turned from one between 2 slightly unequal friends to one between master and servant. Lisette never failed to remind Katie of her destitute position in relation to her and always told her that she could be replaced in an instant. Katie endured because, well, what else was there to do? She very well couldn't leave this high-class lifestyle alone, could she? Lisette also dated many men. When she met Katie, she had a fairly serious relationship with Christian Navarro, a celebrity wine entrepreneur whose job was to curate the cellars of Hollywood celebrities. She even got engaged to Navarro, but also started seeing a struggling actor named Scott Bryan Cooper. Lisette juggled both men for a while before she abandoned Cooper for his friend, a high school dropout named David Garrett. Garrett was a guy with a bunch bunch of tattoos who also sold the green along with a whole host of other illegal substances. When Cooper complained about being dumped for Garrett, Lisette sent some guys over to intimidate him by mugging him, taking his stuff, and leaving him by the side of the road. She's a real sweetheart like that. By the time Lisette's lies were exposed, she had dumped Garrett and dated another man while dating a bouncer she hired for her illicit private jet transport trips. Through all this, she manipulated and lied to all the men she was seeing, telling them that they were important to her. In the end, all those men were merely a means to an end. The truth about Lisette only came out after the police arrested her. Once she was arrested, court documents and witness statements revealed the unbelievable truth about Lisette, her claims to wealth, and her family background. To be fair, Lisette did get one thing right. According to Rolling Stone, Lisette really is related to the Samsung Lee family, but she's not an heiress. Lisette was born out of wedlock back in Seoul to Corinne Lee, a daughter of the late Samsung founder Yang Chul Lee. Her real name at birth was Ji Yun Lee. Ji Yun Lee's problem was that her father, Yoshi Morita, was a Japanese casino mogul, which meant that he wasn't a suitable mate for someone with Corinne Lee's pedigree. Korean tradition didn't look too kindly upon interethnic marriages, and Koreans believe that people who owned casinos were gangsters. We totally don't think that in the US, right? Since neither family wanted to claim the child, Yoshi allowed his daughter to be adopted by his very close friend, Bum Jo Lee. Jo Lee was commonly known as Master Lee due to his 6th-degree black belt in martial arts, and he tried to give Ji Yun Lee, now Lisette, a proper upbringing. He didn't send her to the private schools like she told everyone. Instead, he sent her to a basic public school, and she grew up in a basic apartment, not a mansion. Through all of this, Lisette's father remained in the picture, and she milked that connection for all it was worth. She made sure he showered her with expensive gifts and gave her a ridiculously high allowance. He bought her a Mercedes for her 16th birthday and essentially gave her a taste of the good life. According to Rolling Stone, he gave her an insane monthly allowance close to $100,000. Once Lisette started living on her own, she decided to reinvent herself, not as the ordinary adopted daughter of Master Lee, but as the millionaire heiress of 2 very wealthy parents. She indeed tried being a Korean pop star and model, but gave up as she complained that it was too easy for her. Oddly enough, that was our reason for her not being a K-pop model as well. And then, one day, for no reason at all, she decided to reinvent herself again, but this time as a member of the substance-dealing underworld. Lisette first learned about buying and selling spicy greens from one of her boyfriends, Garrett. Garrett was already in the business, and Lisette wanted to be his understudy for whatever reason. He told her there was a lot of money to be made if one could move hundreds of pounds of product from California to Ohio, and that he could help set up all the payment channels. Garrett said that they could earn double their expenses once they sold all the product too. For some reason, Lisette was very hyped to get started. She put together a team, and it had everyone in her circle she had forced to cower to her total social authority. This included her friend Katie, her building's doorman, Henry Hernandez, who she was also dating at the time, and Garrett, who did the actual business. The smuggling itself was supposed to be simple. 13 cases of product would be packed and all loaded into a private jet that cost about $50,000 to hire. The plane would land in Ohio, and Lisette and her entire entourage would make it hard for anyone to suspect her of anything. Lisette was thinking everyone would suspect Garrett if he hired the private jet and loaded the suitcases in it to cross the country. But no one would suspect a model slash heiress slash pop star slash celebrity like Lisette for doing the same thing. They would chalk it up to regular celebrity shenanigans. And that's how the gig began. At first, Katie and the rest of the crew didn't know what they were getting into. But after the first few trips, they all knew. But it was hard to back out. She was paying all of them quite handsomely to be part of her star entourage, and her control over them was absolute. Lisette took care of travel plans through a chartered jet broker and sent hundreds of thousands of dollars in payments through Katie's small bank account. She paid $50,000 for each jet charter, but she was moving so much weight that it didn't matter. After all, she was selling at around 100% profit margin. Lisette and her crew were soon taking 2 to 3 trips from California to Ohio monthly, and each time she had the same boring story for airport officials who asked what was in her suitcase. She always said she was moving from LA to Columbus, but the jet company had assigned her the same pilot more than once. And those pilots started wondering how many times one person could relocate from California to Ohio in 1 year. Airport personnel also realized that Lisette was making these trips twice or thrice a month, and that it looked very suspicious as well. At this point, Garrett and Lisette Lisette had fallen out due to a business disagreement. You would expect this to dampen Lisette's spirits and stop her from going on the trip since she technically didn't need the money. But instead of doing that, she decided to become a complete underground queenpin and hired someone to replace Garrett. The person happened to be Christopher Cash, a jet broker who'd also quickly deciphered what Lisette was doing with all her trips and decided to join her. To make things even spicier, Lisette also started dating Mr. Cash. The trips continued, and very soon the DEA office in Ohio got an anonymous tip about a highly suspicious flight coming in from California to Ohio. By the time Lisette landed in Ohio in June 2010, the airport was surrounded by DEA agents and sniffing dogs. It didn't take too long for Lisette to confess to her part in the crimes. Once Katie and other members of her staff were interrogated, the truth came out. The truth about her ancestry and her birth was also revealed. Of course, Samsung had to intervene because Lisette wouldn't stop claiming that she was part of the popular Samsung Lee family. The corporation put out a press release that completely disavowed her and said she had never been a part of the family, though some think the company might have done that just to protect its name. When she finally faced a judge, Lisette had thrown in the towel with a guilty plea. It was her only chance of getting a lower sentence since the evidence was stacked against her. The judge decided to sentence her to 6 years. Her conspirators, like Garrett, were also tracked down and arrested. Garrett got 10 years for his part in the gig, and Christopher Cash got 4 years in prison as well. Lisette's so-called best friend Katie got a month in prison and a year under house arrest. Despite her short-lived criminal empire crumbling all around her, Lisette still seemed to be in high spirits. According to Rolling Stone, she never admitted to really lying to anyone. She said she omitted certain truths and people around her just filled it up with their imagination. She also said that was merely the fault of their own stupidity and could never be bothered to actually correct them. According to Lisette, it was merely an incredible coincidence that all her friends made up the same lies about her and she never actually told them those lies. It has to make you wonder if Lisette Lee really believes this or if she's just telling another lie. In prison, Lisette made sure to have the time of her life. According to Rolling Stone, she took her prison time as a vacation of some sort and generally had a fun time, or so she told Rolling Stone. Importantly, Lisette believed that there was life for her after prison. She said that she was going to go into the casino business properly once she got out, and she'd promptly resume her celebrity lifestyle. She also said that she believes that she's still kind of engaged to Christian Navarro and expects to marry him once she was out. However, Navarro, on the other hand, said no whenever he heard that statement. As of early 2024, Lisette Lee is yet to be confirmed to actually be released from prison, but since she only was sentenced to 6 years, she's most likely walking around as a free woman. Due to information protection laws, it's difficult to figure out exactly what she's up to these days. But we can only wonder what the gangster Queen of Beverly Hills is up to. Who are the criminals that just can't help themselves but do crime over and over? Let's find out, starting with number 5, the Wedding Crasher. Sandra Lynn Henson has taken up an interesting hobby. She likes to crash weddings and then steal from the guests of those weddings while their focus is elsewhere. She was pretty successful, and despite being in her 50s, she's had a rather splendid 6-year career stealing like this. She's done it in 6 southern states and even went back to doing it after she was arrested and released on bail. Sandra might be old, but she's not looking to retire from her life of crime anytime soon. The crazy thing about Sandra is that her rap sheet is like a mile long, and yet she's never been behind bars for a considerable period of time. In 2019, she was arrested for crashing weddings and stealing stuff, but she got released on bail and simply moved to another jurisdiction to continue her crimes. In fact, in the last 6 years, she's been arrested in Alabama, Tennessee, and Mississippi, and every time she gets arrested, she finds her way out and continues to crash weddings and steal everything she can get her greedy paws on. At this point, her arrests are just a temporary hold on her career and have no lasting impact on her. The thing about Sandra is that she's no random party crasher. In fact, she's a rather meticulous party crasher. At one wedding she crashed, she waited until the entire party went to the front of the building to hold sparklers for the newlyweds. Once the hall was almost empty, she got to work and even wandered into the bridal room to see what she could nab. That was when the sister of the bride walked in, Cindy Lou Who style, and realized that Sandra was a thief. So the police were called and her vehicle was searched. That's when police discovered a list of weddings and venues she had been to and planned to be at. She even had the names of the bride and groom. She had made a list, checked it twice, and was going to steal from everyone, whether they were naughty or nice. But it hasn't been all parties and thefts for our favorite crasher. In 2017, the police caught her stealing after she made the rookie mistake of being captured on camera. Her case went to trial, and she was convicted and put on probation. You'd probably think probation would stop Sandra, or that she would at least lay low for a bit. Well, maybe you would lay low for a bit. That's simply not an option for a superstar criminal like Sandra. 2 years later, in 2019, Sandra got caught doing the same thing once again. This time it was in Alabama, and she was promptly charged with 2 counts of theft. She was caught on camera again and had stolen $500 in cash and gift cards from the gift table. The police later discovered that the same day she had done the same thing at 3 other weddings. In 2021, her trial was finally completed and she was sentenced to a year in prison. Her probation was also revoked. So did Sandra actually end up in prison like you'd expect? Well, yes, but she was released from prison early and was back on the streets. And Sandra only knows how to do 2 things: steal from weddings and, well, that's probably it. It seems like that's all she does is just steal from weddings. Maybe she does something else, but her other talents hardly seem relevant at this point. Thankfully, Sandra has been arrested again, and this time she may actually have to serve out her sentence. Have you ever been to a wedding or crashed one yourself? Tell us about it in the comments below. Number 4. Overcharged. Sergey and Galina Lebedenko stole a whopping $34 million from a millionaire Democratic donor by overcharging his Amex. And the incredible thing is, this tycoon didn't notice the millions missing from his checking account until years later. In fact, the victim, 79-year-old Wynn McCormack, only noticed the massive fraud 7 years into it. The fraud itself was simple. Sergey and Galina started working with McCormack in 2006. McCormack hired their driving service, and over time, Sergey started running daily errands for the multimillionaire. Soon, their relationship grew even further as McCormack hired Sergey and his wife to fix things around his house and even help him house sit. McCormack paid Sergey and his wife through his American Express card. The payments were approved by his bank, and our multimillionaire did very little oversight on his end. This meant that Sergey and his wife could bill McCormack whatever they wanted, and he wouldn't notice. The bank would also pay them out since they believed that the charges were genuine. And that's how the heist started. Very soon, Sergey and his wife started inflating regular bills by hundreds of thousands of dollars. They used the money they got from the theft to fund a lavish lifestyle they could never have afforded on their own. This included a $1.5 million executive jet, a $2 million home in California, a $2.3 million home in Oregon, and other houses in Portland for their adult children and their pastor. That's right, Sergey and Galina are dedicated Christians, and they believed their pastor deserved a house funded by stolen money. Unfortunately for Sergey and his partner, their faith couldn't make them whole. McCormack eventually got wise to the scam and started asking questions. In November of 2023, McCormack started asking hard questions about the figures he was being charged by Sergey. But instead of just denying the charge and stopping the theft like any honest thief would, Sergey denied any wrongdoing, telling McCormack that if he was such a problem, he should be fired. And why do you accuse me of these things? Blah, blah, blah. And then continued stealing all the same. McCormack, who sounds like a surprisingly nice guy, even started pleading with Sergey to stop stealing from him after noticing $300,000 in charges in 2 months. Sergey still denied any wrongdoing and again continued to steal. McCormack even tried to stop the theft by asking Sergey to report his expenses directly to an accountant, but that didn't work either. Eventually, the FBI was alerted and Sergey and his wife were arrested. The police searched their $1 million home and found $100,000 in cash, 150 ounces of gold worth about $300,000, and 12 firearms. Well, the Lebedenkos have now been arrested and are currently awaiting trial. The crazy thing is when McCormack noticed the theft, he actually told Sergey that if he kept up with the stealing, he'd get fired for sure. How's that not automatic termination? Sergey was clearly fraudulently charging McCormack about $500 a day every month, and he just gets a warning? And it wasn't as if he was skimming or something. These two were taking a significant amount of money. Like, if he just said, "Okay, sir," and went from there, they'd still have everything they stole. But greed is the mighty undoer, isn't it? Number 3. Rent the scam. Brandy Horn had a great business going for her. She would rent designer items from rental companies, such as Rent the Runway and Poshmark, and then sell those items online. When the victim companies contacted her to get their items back, she would either dispute the charges or cancel her credit card entirely. By the time she was caught, she had defrauded 3 victim companies of over $820,000. The companies involved tried their best to stop her, but she was far too slippery to be caught. Her accounts were repeatedly reported and flagged, but Brandy didn't care about things like that. She simply created another account and continued her scam. By the time she was caught, she had created hundreds of different accounts just to keep stealing. Once she got the items she wanted, she'd photograph them and post them on e-commerce sites for sale. Sometimes she even used the images that the victim companies had used to advertise the items to begin with. Well, at least she's efficient. Over the course of Brandy's criminal career as a thief of designer items, she snagged at least 1,063 items that she had gotten from rental companies, and she sold them all within 2 years, which means she was renting and selling about 40 items a month. Brandy sure has an incredible work ethic for a thief. To make her sales, she would often remove labels on luxury items. According to the police, the tags of dresses she was selling contained residue on the label. This meant that Brandy most likely removed heat-sensitive tags from the items, like a professional. Brandy was eventually caught and has now been charged with mail fraud, wire fraud, and the interstate transportation of stolen property. She could go to jail for 50 years if convicted. With marketplaces like Mercari and Poshmark becoming more and more popular, it wouldn't be surprising if this sort of scam started increasing in popularity. Number 2. Who's actually to blame? Anwar Farid Alam and Yousafzai Fahim Alam basically found an infinite money glitch and used it to make infinite dollars. They discovered that they could post priority mail and pay for $100 insurance coverage, and then they could dispute the mails and would cash out on that $100 insurance payment. The grounds of the dispute was usually that the package they sent had been damaged in some way or that the item was missing. And yes, they could do this endlessly. In fact, by the time they were caught, the brothers had done it over 20,000 times and had defrauded the UPS of over $2 million. To make their story more convincing, the brothers would include fabricated invoices together with photos of goods that weren't actually in the package. A couple of times, the brothers started going to great lengths to obscure their identity. They would use aliases, adopt fake business names, use different addresses, and even get UPS to send their $100 to different post offices in the same area. The gig was a profitable one, and the brothers were able to make bank for 3 years uninterrupted. But one day, the USPS eventually noticed this blatant fraud and tracked the boys down. It's extraordinary that this scam was carried out for 3 years and the system didn't notice until over $2 million in fraudulent claims was paid out. This means that if the brothers had just stolen $1 million, they might have never been found out. Each brother now faces a mandatory maximum of 20 years in prison. However, since they have no prior felony convictions, they might get a light sentence. It's pretty wild that these guys made that much over such a long time through the insurance that you always just say no to at the post office. And who's the dumb one here? The brothers or the US government, who apparently don't have basic system checks in place? If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay right here for our past release to find out how this guy took advantage of money meant to help the homeless population. Number 1. The self-aware Dine and Dasher. Craig Sharp was way too sharp for his good, as he's now been jailed for over a year for skipping out on hotel and restaurant bills. And that's what he says he wanted. But how did Craig even get into this situation in the first place? Well, it's been a long time coming. According to the police, Craig has a rap sheet going back to 1993, and he has served at least 4 different prison sentences for fraud. However, Craig isn't your regular fraud guy. He doesn't use fake names or fake credit cards. Everything about him is legit. He always gives his right name, right credit card account details, and always has a fun time when enjoying his meals and drinks for free. The only really sneaky thing Craig did was sneak out of the establishments he defrauded when no one was looking, and he became pretty good at this actually. His MO was to go to some restaurant and make friends with all the servers. After that, he would order a bunch of drinks and food and even order for other people, including the staff. This would typically get get everyone to let their guards down. And then, when no one was looking, he'd vamoose. Craig did the same thing for hotels as well. After lodging for a night, he'll continue to extend his stay while being best buddies with everyone at the hotel. The hotel employees start warming up to him and start believing his endless excuses of why he's yet to settle his bills. Since it's not strange for people to settle their bills after their stay, they allow Craig to stay for months on end without paying a dime. One time, he ran up a $5,000 hotel bill and then left without paying. The shocking thing was that Craig was almost impossible to catch despite leaving legitimate information and addresses. This was because he sometimes stayed in contact with the businesses and promised them that he would pay in bits and pieces. Of course, he usually didn't come through with that payment, and in the end, the businesses he had defrauded were forced to involve the police. When he was eventually caught, Craig confessed immediately and said that his scams were simply a habit he couldn't kick and were an escape for him. He said he always knew he would be caught. That's why he always left his real details. In fact, he said he hoped he could go to prison, get himself sorted, and come out and restart his life. So that's probably why he turned up to his sentencing with an overnight bag and, strangely enough, a cheerful disposition. Who are the most unlikely criminals we'd never expect? Let's find out. Starting with number 6, the serial robber model. Monique Marina Agostino, a real-life Instagram model and wannabe actor, got herself arrested by an elite strike force police unit that normally goes after motorcycle gangs, right after she was released on bail for a handful of other crimes she was appealing. Monique has had a bit of a rough patch, getting herself tangled up in a series of crimes, including helping to pull off 4 robberies in Sydney back in 2018. But here's the thing, she was out on bail, appealing her 18-month sentence when she decided to break the rules again, sending the cops on a manhunt. Enter the elite strike force police, Strike Force Raptor, which is a name that came out of an 80s action movie, swooped in to save the day. Luckily, they managed to arrest Monique, which we're sure the surrounding neighborhood was grateful that an elite strike force was able to take down an Instagram model. We're sure they earned their pay with this one. Along with outstanding warrants, Monique was charged with being in possession of some allegedly stolen goods, which isn't really a good look for the gram, but she's far from the only one posting dumb things on that platform. Monique's not your average troublemaker either. She's a single mom who grew up in the posh Sydney suburb of Belrose, and even attended Killarney Heights High School, which is kind of like living in Palo Alto or Cupertino, where Google and Apple are located. So even though Monique came from a wealthy neighborhood, she still went down a bad path. Back in 2019, she was slapped with an 18-month sentence for those robbery shenanigans, where she drove a bunch of dudes around to break into shops, and let's not forget the separate spate of charges for causing chaos at Blacktown Westfield Shopping Center. She kind of got into everything. Contraband, stolen goods, and even a bit of knife-wielding action in Target. Maybe she was trying to slash Target's already low prices. But wait, we're not done. Monique's got a flair for the dramatics as well. She represented herself in court after her lawyer withdrew from her first case. She actually told the judge that it would be her fault if she gave Monique time because she's threatened self-harm in the past. The judge wasn't buying it and still handed down a pretty hefty sentence. Monique appealed it, got bailed out, rearrested, and now 2 years. Number 5, 2 wives. Rexford Lynn Keel Jr., a resident of North Carolina, admitted to being responsible for the passing of his wife, Diana Alejandra Keel, and was sentenced to at least 32 years in prison. But the story behind his conviction is nothing short of insane. It all began with the discovery of Diana's body, tragically dumped in the woods. The Nash County Sheriff's Office wasted no time in pointing the finger squarely at Keel, even raising suspicions about the passing of his first wife back in 2006. Diana's disappearance, reported by her daughter, sparked a frantic search, ultimately led to the grim discovery. Amidst whispers of a troubled marriage and looming divorce, the plot thickened. There were talks of domestic issues between Keel and Diana, and friends and family hinted at tensions brewing beneath the surface. The circumstances surrounding Diana's passing were anything but straightforward, and the authorities treated it as a crime from the get-go. So of course, they were very interested in Keel. But Keel wasn't about to stick around for those conversations. He attempted to flee, but the law caught up with him during a routine traffic stop in Arizona while he was attempting to flee to Mexico. The subsequent trial was a media frenzy, forcing a change of venue due to the extensive coverage. Despite the challenges, Keel's guilt was undeniable, and he eventually pleaded guilty, getting 32 years in prison. His first wife's passing was still ruled as an accident at the time of this video. Number 4, the worst friend ever. Darryl Evans, a smooth-talking con man, conned his friends out of £377,000, sending him to prison. Evans, with his slick talk and charming demeanor, managed to convince his friends to hand over their hard-earned cash for what they thought would be big returns on their investments. Who wouldn't trust a guy who calls himself a financial advisor, right? But the problem was, it was all a sham. Evans, the little eel that he is, took over £377,000 from his friends, promising them the moon and the stars while he lived it up on their dime. The fact that he knew full well that almost all of these people couldn't afford to lose the money they handed him, since it was a bunch of retirement funds and pensions, shows exactly what kind of person this guy is. He was so into scamming that he continued his scheme even after getting busted by the cops. This dude actually made himself the executor of someone's will, then took all their money and put it into his own account, because he didn't want to limit himself to only stealing from living people, you know. Darryl Evans was eventually investigated by the police and arrested. During his trial, Evans had the nerve to stand in court and spin more lies, trying to weasel his way out of trouble by blaming everyone else around him. So much so that the judge even commented on how fluid the garbage flowed out of his mouth. Apparently, no one knows where all the money even went, since Evans claimed that the police destroyed all the evidence of his investments. We're sure there was a collective eye rolling when he spat that one out. Thankfully, justice prevailed, and Evans got slapped with an 8-year sentence based on his refusal to say where the money went. Number 3. Dr. Scam. Dr. Olabunmi Adegbo Sheik created a phony tenancy agreement and a fake landlord to get nearly £12,000 in benefits for a flat that didn't exist, and he got away with it. Olabunmi, aka the Crooked Doc, decided to get a little creative with his housing situation while training as a medic in the UK. He claimed to be shelling out £900 a month for an apartment in London, when in reality, he was just chilling with his mom in Kent, because why not, right? He also managed to rake in a sweet £12,000 in housing benefits over the course of a year. Not bad for a guy living with his mom. Of course, Olabunmi's little scheme didn't last long. Of course, someone actually did their job after a year, but still, and it was quickly discovered that the address didn't even exist, let alone the landlord. The cops caught wind of his antics, raided his mom's place, and found all the evidence they needed to bust him. You'd think a doctor would be smarter than to pull off such a stunt, but here we are. Olabunmi's excuse was that he wasn't able to practice medicine in the UK yet because he failed a couple exams. According to his mom, he's since passed them and has been in practice ever since. In the end, he got slapped with a 12-month community order and 100 hours of unpaid work. So he basically got away with it. It's dumb that a future doctor thought it would be a good idea to risk all that work and his career for such a little amount of money. Hopefully, he's a better doctor than he is a scammer. Number 2. Frozen winnings. Judy Carroll, who won a $5.2 million lottery jackpot, pleaded guilty to scamming 6 people after she won. Because whenever there's a scam, the first place you look is at lottery winners. Back in '89, Judy and her hubby hit the jackpot, scoring a sweet $5.2 million. But instead of living it up, they kept a low profile, probably to avoid long-lost relatives coming out of the woodwork. Now, fast forward a bit, and Judy starts telling tales about her accounts being frozen by the IRS over unpaid taxes. Classic move, right? Except it was mostly a load of baloney. So her friend, Kelly Lotak, ended up helping out by handing over a whopping $622,000 in prepaid credit cards and cash transfers. We want to be friends with Kelly. But Kelly wasn't alone in being duped. 5 other poor souls fell for Judy's sob story, coughing up an extra $618,000. To avoid paying everyone back, Judy repeatedly said her husband had his identity stolen and that her accounts were frozen. Her friends accepted these excuses at first, but they got old quick. Kelly eventually called the IRS herself to ask about the frozen accounts and finally uncovered the fraud. It turns out that the IRS did freeze her accounts, but it was only one and for a short time. Judy was finally arrested in Montana by the FBI, and now she's pleading guilty to wire fraud and tax evasion. Judy took a plea deal, and now she's got to pay back nearly $1.6 million to her victims and the tax man. As for Kelly, well, let's just say she's learned a valuable lesson about trusting friends with deep pockets. Bet she won't be lending out her credit cards anytime soon. Number 1. The disability scam. Shahab Reza, who was profoundly deaf, one of the severest forms of hearing loss, ran an 800,000-pound disability allowance scam that landed him in prison for 9 years. Reza was pulling off his massive con while spending the cash on diamonds and jet-setting around the globe, like you do. But here's the thing. He roped in his own family, including his wife Shanaz and their 2 kids, Abbas and Zainab. They were all in on the action, submitting fake invoices for sign language interpreters like it's nobody's business. And they didn't just stop there. They even set up fake companies all over the place to launder the money. Nice family, right? So fast forward to the courtroom drama, and Shahab gets hit with a 9-year sentence. His wife Shanaz and son Abbas aren't off the hook either. They're facing their own time behind bars for their roles in the scheme. Meanwhile, Reza's wife Shanaz bawled her eyes out in court as she got slapped with a 22-month sentence. His son Abbas got a suspended sentence because apparently he was under his dad's influence. 2 other women, Deva and Natella, jumped on the benefits gravy train as well, submitting fake claims left and right. And they didn't even need sign language interpreters. They just wanted a slice of the scamming pie. In the end, it's a real family affair gone wrong. The Reza clan's lavish lifestyle came crashing down, and now they're facing the consequences. But hey, at least they'll have plenty of time to brush up on their sign language skills in the slammer, right? And who knows, maybe they'll even start a Fraudsters Anonymous group behind bars. What are some of the weirdest crimes people do? Let's find out, starting with number 6, Stanley Cups. Delaney Garcia Lopez was arrested for allegedly stealing 65 Stanley Cups, valued at around $2,500, from a store in Roseville, California. And no, for all 5 of you hockey fans out there, not that Stanley Cup. Stanley, the rugged drinkware company and inventor of the vacuum bottle that's popular today. The incident occurred in January of 2024 when Garcia Lopez was caught by Roseville Police Department stuffing her car with the popular drinkware without paying for them. Not only did she face charges of grand theft for stealing over $950 worth of property, but she was also slapped with a DUI charge at the time of her arrest. The arrest caught attention not just because of the sheer number of stolen items, but also because of the surge in popularity of Stanley Cups. These 40-ounce insulated tumblers had become a sensation, particularly among Gen Z, after gaining attention on TikTok. The cups, once marketed primarily to outdoorsmen, had seen a resurgence in demand, with viral videos showing consumers clearing store shelves within minutes and even crying tears of joy after receiving them as Christmas gifts. The incident also highlighted the dark side of the Stanley Cup craze, with reports of school-age kids bullying other kids for not having an official tumbler and warnings from police about counterfeit iterations of the item circulating online. While the exact motive behind Garcia Lopez's alleged theft remains unclear, her actions prompted some humorous speculation. With her car overflowing with Stanley Cups, you can't help but wonder whether she had ambitious plans to sell them for a profit, or if she was simply aiming to amass an impressive collection for display purposes. After all, 65 Stanley Cups would make for an eye-catching conversation starter in any living room. We know a lot about interior decorations. In all seriousness, the incident serves as a reminder of the consequences of engaging in criminal behavior, especially when you've been drinking. Garcia Lopez now faces potential jail time and fines if found guilty of grand theft and DUI charges. While it's understandable to want to join in on the excitement, resorting to theft is never the answer. Let's hope that Garcia Lopez had a plan in mind for those 65 Stanley Cups and wasn't just looking to add them to her weird personal collection of outdoor travel drinkware. Number 5. Dug up. In Orange County, Florida, a single mother named Amanda Brochu found herself the victim of an unusual theft. Her concrete driveway was stolen right out of the ground. The incident left her home with nothing but a muddy patch of dirt in its place. Brochu's ordeal began shortly after she listed her home for sale. Strange contractors started appearing, claiming to be there to measure the driveway. In total, 5 different workers showed up, all with the same story. When questioned, they explained that they had been hired by a man named Andre from the Tampa area to provide estimates for a replacement driveway. They even showed Brochu text messages allegedly from Andre requesting the estimate and providing her address. However, suspicions arose when the supposed client, Andre, was unreachable and failed to provide proof of ownership when requested. Despite these red flags, Brochu's security camera captured footage of a bulldozer arriving a week later, tearing up the concrete driveway and hauling it away. The homeowner expressed her shock at the bizarre turn of events, stating that she was completely unprepared for such a peculiar theft. Her real estate agent, Rocky Sanchez, described utter disbelief upon learning of the incident. Sanchez took to social media to raise awareness about the missing driveway, believing it to be part of an elaborate scam. Sanchez's suspicions were supported by others in the real estate community who came forward with similar stories of property theft, ranging from driveways to roofs and exteriors. This revelation added a troubling layer to Brochu's predicament, leaving her grappling with the urgency of replacing the driveway to fulfill the terms of a pending home sale. The pressure mounted as Brochu faced a tight deadline to replace the driveway or risk losing the property she intended to buy nearby. With her recent investments made in roof replacement and other expenses, she now found herself scrambling to secure the funds needed for the $10,000 project. The situation cast a shadow over her plans, jeopardizing her family's future and leaving her feeling helpless. As the investigation into the driveway theft unfolded, the Orange County Sheriff's Office took up the case. However, as of the latest report, there have been no updates on the progress of the investigation or any leads on the identity of the perpetrators, which is weird since you'd think the construction company that stole the driveway would be pretty easily identified. No one heard from Andre again, making us think that maybe he was looking for something a little more concrete. Number 4. Art collecting. A Frenchman named Stéphane Brainwashed embarked on an impressive spree of art theft, pilfering some 239 pieces from around 200 museums across Europe. His haul, estimated to be worth a staggering $2 billion, included renowned works like Lucas Cranach, The Elder's Sibyl, Princess of Cleves, from the new castle in Baden-Baden, Germany. Brainwashed, driven by a passion for art, saw himself as a connoisseur, creating his personal Louvre in the attic of his mother's modest home in Mulhouse, France. With his girlfriend, Anne-Catherine Kleinklaus, as his accomplice, he executed his heists from 1994 to 2001, targeting mainly museums across France, Holland, Switzerland, Germany, and Austria. His method was simple. Armed with a Swiss Army knife, he would remove the paintings from their mounts and conceal them, sometimes even wearing them under his clothing. His girlfriend played the role of lookout, dressed elegantly to blend in with museum goers. Brainwashd's obsession with art was all consuming. He believed in the transformative power of beauty, considering it the ultimate currency. His actions, however, were driven by a compulsive urge to steal rather than a genuine appreciation for artistry. Despite his careful planning and successful heists, Brainwashd's luck eventually ran out. His downfall came in 2001 when he was caught stealing a bugle. Although a minor offense, suspicions arose about his involvement in more significant crimes. A police inspector got a search warrant for Brainwashd's home, leading to a shocking discovery. The walls, once adorned with priceless paintings, were now bare. Brainwashd's mother had disposed of the stolen treasures, tossing them into canals, forests, and even burned some. Brainwashed served over 3 years in prison for his thefts in France and Switzerland. Upon release, he returned to a life of crime, resorting to shoplifting before eventually reverting to his art theft obsession. Despite his immense talent for stealing, Brainwashd's downfall came when he attempted to sell his loot on eBay, leading to his arrest yet again. In his latest trial in April of 2023, he was sentenced to house arrest, wearing an ankle monitor until 2031. Reflecting on his actions, Brainwashed expressed remorse, acknowledging his fall from a master of the universe to nothing. And of course, his mom reverted to the classic mom behavior of just throwing invaluable collections in the garbage because she didn't know what they were. It's true for comic books, baseball cards, and now priceless art. Oh my god, Mom. I can't believe you threw away my Brett Favre rookie cards. You're so lame. Ugh. Number 3. 32 going on 13. Here's an update on the case of Shelby Hewitt, a 32-year-old social worker accused of posing as a traumatized high school student in Boston. Appearing in court, facing 9 charges, including forgery and fraud, Hewitt's alleged scheme was as elaborate as it was weird. Over a span of more than a year, Hewitt assumed the identity of a severely traumatized foster child, fabricating a backstory complete with forged documents. She managed to enroll in 3 different public high schools in Boston Boston, including Brighton High School, English High School, and Jeremiah E. Burke High School. What makes this case particularly weird is the extent of Hewitt's deception. Not only did she adopt fake names and personas, but she also embedded herself within the school communities, even joining extracurricular activities such as the girls' basketball team at Burke High School. In a bizarre twist, she reportedly declined to participate in team photos, claiming her foster parents prohibited it. Hewitt even selected the number 32 for her basketball jersey, a detail that adds an interesting layer to the story given it was her actual age. Throughout her time at these schools, Hewitt allegedly made friends with students, weaving all kinds of stories about her background and family life. She even went so far as to ask to be called by different names. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Hewitt's alleged actions is that she was employed as a social worker by the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families, entrusted with the well-being of vulnerable children. Her purported scheme involved exploiting her position and knowledge of the system to bypass normal enrollment procedures, using federal laws regarding the immediate enrollment of foster children to her advantage. Despite the seriousness of the charges she faces, Hewitt's defense attorney emphasized her mental health challenges, suggesting that her actions may have been influenced by underlying psychological issues. As if that's going to somehow make everyone go, "Oh, okay, well, no biggie." The case has left many unanswered questions, particularly regarding Hewitt's motives. Why would a grown woman go to such lengths to pose as a high school student? What did she hope to gain from her scam? Furthermore, the fact that Hewitt was able to carry out her deception for over a year before being caught raises concerns about the oversight and security measures in place within the Boston public school system. Parents and community members are understandably alarmed by the breach of trust and the potential risks posed by Hewitt's presence in the schools. Number 2. Mr. Not Anonymous. Rob Strain, a 33-year-old man from the UK, made up a story about winning £171 million in the Euro Millions jackpot. His supposed windfall quickly became the talk of the town, with Strain boasting to family, friends, and even locals at his nearby shop that he was the fortunate winner of the third largest lottery prize in history. The fantastical claims didn't stop there. Strain allegedly also told other stories of newfound wealth, boasting of extravagant spending sprees on lavish homes, fancy cars, and even private security. Photographs circulating on social media showing him apparently enjoying his newfound riches, standing tall and proud, seemingly without a care in the world. However, the charade soon began to unravel as suspicions arose among those who knew him. It wasn't long before whispers circulated about the legitimacy of Strain's supposed winnings, especially after he and his girlfriend were borrowing money despite his wealth. The truth came to light when Camelot, the company behind the Euro Millions lottery, said that a genuine ticket holder had actually claimed the prize. Strain's name was notably absent from the list of legitimate winners, further blowing up his ridiculous story. The fallout from Strain's alleged deception left those who had been taken in feeling betrayed and disillusioned. One man, who had lent money to Strain, expressed feeling physically sick upon learning the truth, comparing his experience to being bent over a barrel. It looks like Strain's plan was to get some personal loans from people based on his supposed winnings. And he was always going to get caught, since obviously his lotto winnings were never going to come. There were other ways he could have claimed to be getting money too, so we're not sure why he'd pick something that can be easily checked, unless he just wanted some attention, which is also weird since usually lottery winners get too much attention from people seeking handouts. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay right here to find out about some of these rappers' dumbest crimes. Number 1. 20 years of faking. Christopher Stultz, a veteran from New Hampshire, admitted to a bizarre scheme, faking his need for a wheelchair for 2 decades to claim over $660,000 in benefits he was not entitled to. In a surprising twist, Stultz, who worked as a kindergarten teacher, managed to deceive both the Department of Veterans Affairs and his colleagues, posing as a severely disabled individual. Claiming in early 2003 that he could no longer use his feet, Stultz convinced the VA to rate him as 100% disabled, leading to a significant increase in his monthly benefits. Over the years, he continued to perpetuate the lie, even receiving funds to purchase and modify special cars to accommodate his supposed disability. However, Stultz's elaborate ruse began to unravel when law enforcement officers observed him walking normally on multiple occasions without the assistance of his wheelchair. In one instance, after appearing to use a wheelchair at a VA medical center in Boston, he was seen seen walking around a mall soon after leaving the facility. This pattern repeated when he left a Manchester VA medical center, further backing up suspicions about his fraudulent activities. Ultimately, Stoltz pleaded guilty to one count of making false statements to the Department of Veteran Affairs. As part of his plea deal, he faced up to 18 months in prison and was required to repay the $662,800 he received. The plea agreement also revealed that Stoltz admitted that he had sold the specially adapted vehicles provided by the VA. Stoltz's scam makes you wonder about his motivations. Was it that he simply liked being in a wheelchair, had a love for scamming, or was it just stupidity? Whatever his reasons were, the length and scale of his deception is weird, right? It's like he found a way to get paid, but in exchange for avoiding standing in public for the rest of his life. No thank you. Who are a few people we never thought would do crime? Let's find out, starting with number 6. It wasn't hair powder. Jade Hughes was a hairdresser who made a little more money by selling a bit of extra stuff on the side. You know, that sort of extra stuff that makes the DEA all upset and come after you with sniffing dogs and whatnot. She ran this side business with her boyfriend. Hughes was very proud of the products she sold, and she often boasted that its quality would leave people extremely active. Things were going swimmingly for her and her boyfriend, but their jolly ride came to an end when 2 of Jade's phones were seized during a search of another house during an unrelated probe. The phones led the police to Hughes, and her home was raided. The raid proved that Hughes was involved in the illicit trade of contraband, and she was hauled into court. The police found a hoard of product paraphernalia, including 2 digital weighing scales, disposable plastic glove fingers used to bag up products, and 2 mobile phones that were probably used to arrange deliveries, purchases, and sales. Police caught Hughes by going through the confiscated phones and discovering a bunch of slang that could only be referring to illegal substances. This search led to the arrest of Hughes and her boyfriend, and the couple pled guilty to supply of Class A products. Yes, including the most egregious types. Was sentenced to 52 months in prison, while her boyfriend only got 32 months. In court, Hughes said that she was very sorry for her involvement in the trade. She said that she was from a decent home and was raised by both parents and grandparents. She had even gone to a local college where she studied for a level 3 qualification in hairdressing. Life. From then on, she lost her way and then got into the product business after building up debt as a user. It's clear from her testimony that she didn't really have to go into crime and could have easily had a better life. It just goes to show that major crimes don't always come from poverty and rough lives. We can only hope that Hughes will choose another path when she finishes her sentence. Number 5. Arrested relationship. NYPD officer Roni Santiago was in deep trouble after getting sued by Cami Cefante for his extreme and outrageous conduct. Now, you may wonder what sort of extreme and outrageous conduct an NYPD officer may display towards a citizen. It starts with an arrest. Officer Santiago arrested Cami Cefante for shoplifting at Target. That's a pretty run-of-the-mill crime, and ended in Cami being released from the police station after a short holding period. It should have ended there if Officer Santiago was a normal police officer. But he wasn't, and it didn't. Santiago copied Cami's phone number off her files and started texting her barely 20 minutes after she left the station. According to Cami, the first few texts were aggressive, but not vulgar. She said they made her uncomfortable, but she replied because she was afraid Santiago would retaliate or make things worse for her with her criminal case. But then, the messages Officer Santiago sent slowly became more and more vulgar. Santiago started sending explicit messages about how he wanted horizontal favors from Cami and started building from there. Among other graphically inappropriate texts, he said his MO was to flirt with attractive women that he arrested. His messages continued to get more vulgar, with Officer Santiago eventually threatening to show up at Cami's home for dinner, which is obviously just weird and awkward behavior for anyone, let alone a cop. Fortunately, Cami got legal help and sued the NYPD for over $25,000 for Officer Santiago's conduct. We expect the police to protect us, not put us in a position that we need to be protected from them. The police have a tough enough job as it is, and they're under a microscope now more than ever. So this was the last thing the department needed. Do you have any weird stories where someone wouldn't leave you alone? Let us know in the comments below. Number 4. Bad banker. Najib Khan orchestrated one of the largest check-kiting schemes ever in U.S. history and used the proceeds of that crime to live like a king. He had a ridiculous fleet of 240 luxury cars, a private jet, a helicopter, a boat, and properties in the choicest locations in the country. Khan did all this while building a legitimate payroll processing business in Indiana. And before even starting the payroll processing company, he had retired from a bank as the vice president. So it's not like this guy wasn't already making a pretty decent living as it was. But greedy people do greedy things, and Mr. Khan was greedy, so he stole anyway. By the time Khan was done ripping Cleveland's Key Bank off, the company had a $120 million hole in its balance sheet, a hole that the bank had to deploy over 100 staff members to fix. The fraud was so gigantic that the bank had to fire some key staff who had allowed it all to happen. Khan didn't carry out the fraud all at once. He did it meticulously over 7 years. So how did Khan's check-kiting scam work? Well, in 2011, Khan started embezzling money from KeyBank by writing bad checks back and forth between bank accounts he controlled to artificially inflate their balances while the checks were being processed. He'd then cash out those accounts while the checks were still pending, and the bank would be left holding the bag with no money. And Khan did all of this through his payroll business. Khan's victims are too numerous to mention. All his clients, from small businesses to churches and even the Boy Scouts of America, got fleeced. When the scam eventually collapsed, over 1,700 clients lost out on money Khan's company had withdrawn for payroll taxes. This meant that the clients had to make up the difference by paying their employees out of pocket, paying the IRS, and taking out credit lines to sustain their businesses. Some were even forced to lay off their employees. Thankfully, Khan wasn't allowed to get away with it. He was eventually caught and made to pay for his crimes. He's now been sentenced to 8 years in prison and has sold an overwhelming majority of his properties to cover restitution. The court ordered him to pay back $121 million to KeyBank, $27 million to clients, and $9.8 million in back taxes. So far, $65 million has been paid back, and all his 240 cars have been sold to fund that restitution. Now Khan only has his 2005 GMC Yukon, but he won't have a lot of time to drive it since he's in jail. But it's not all sad news for Khan. Under a special agreement with creditors, his wife will retain the couple's $1.1 million Michigan home and $650,000 guest house, several vehicles, a retirement fund, and several bank accounts. So thank heavens the criminal will get to keep some of his lifestyle. We know you were worried. Khan will also keep his retirement account. Since he was 70 at the time he was sentenced, we predict he'll want access to those funds immediately. Number 3. Exploiting the homeless. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office in Portland, Oregon, has arrested Kevin Dahlgreen for theft and misconduct. Mr. Dahlgreen is a really popular online personality known for his viral videos on homelessness. However, Dahlgreen has now been slammed with 19 different charges, including identity theft and official misconduct. The incredible thing is that before his arrest, Dahlgreen was a model citizen. Some officials praised his videos on homelessness, and because they showed how really severe the homelessness crisis really is. However, other service providers claimed that he was sensationalizing the dangers of homelessness for his own selfish gain. Dahlgreen had previous work experience as a homeless service provider, so he was in tune with the problem and knew what causes to highlight through his sometimes controversial videos. Through this, he drew attention from both right and left-wing media, with popular outlets like the New York Post and Fox News featuring his videos. Dahlgreen's videos don't just show homeless people and the extent of their suffering. He also showed their problems to their substances and how that contributed to even more homelessness in the city. He's been very critical of service providers who he says contribute to the illegal substance problems that homeless people deal with. Dahlgreen's work has been so important that the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office paid him $18,000 to produce his study on homelessness. However, when the 6-page report was done, Dahlgreen's critics said it was full of misinformation and appeared unprofessional. So, how did this homeless homeless advocate who appeared to be doing so well for himself end up in police custody? Well, the charges themselves are unclear at the time this video is being made, but we do know that Kevin used the identities of several homeless people to defraud the city of Gresham during the coronavirus pandemic. It's so ironic that the homeless population that Dahlgren was supposed to be serving ended up forming the bulk of his victims. Of course, this has made investigation into the extent of the fraud difficult, since Dahlgren's victims have no permanent address and can be hard to find. Number 2. The Traitor. Josie McLaughlin stole the life savings of a widow, but somehow escaped jail time. She was hired as a helper for 84-year-old Mrs. Ann Sharp and her late husband. Soon, McLaughlin and Mrs. Sharp became extremely close. In fact, McLaughlin was so close to Mrs. Sharp that Mrs. Sharp actually referred to her as a long-lost daughter. And despite being treated like a daughter, McLaughlin still decided to rob Mrs. Sharp of everything she had. McLaughlin drained the widow's savings account of every penny it had. For over 15 months, McLaughlin stole up to 700 pounds from Mrs. Sharp every week by forging fake checks in Mrs. Sharp's name. Since Mrs. Sharp was an elderly woman whose mental awareness was on the decline, she didn't notice the stealing until all her money was gone. And when Mrs. Sharp did eventually discover the missing money, she asked McLaughlin for an explanation. Mrs. Sharp, by pretending to call the police and bank, asked for explanations. Thankfully, McLaughlin couldn't get away with her crime forever. Detectives discovered that she had already been jailed for fraud back in 2019 after she was caught stealing from a charity in precisely the same manner. McLaughlin said that she had financial difficulties due to relationship issues and was using Mrs. Sharp's money to stay afloat. But that didn't really hold much water, since McLaughlin was staying afloat in a pretty affluent neighborhood in the UK. In court, McLaughlin faced up to 4 years in prison, but was sentenced to just 2 years with the entire sentence suspended, which is basically probation. It seems a bit outrageous that she got a little more than a slap on the wrist, but that was only possible because Mrs. Sharp herself had written to the magistrate and asked him not to impose a sentence. This is a good time to double check and keep on keeping a close eye on your loved ones who are being watched over by a caregiver. Scammers can come from anywhere at any time. Number 1. The Crime Lawyer. Normally, when you think of a lawyer, you think they'd be on the right side of the law. Not Linda Haddad. She basically committed all types of crimes. Well, not like all the types of crimes, but definitely a significant bunch. She loved her nose beers. She slept with clients and even had, let's just say, some real sultry talk over the phone with inmates she was supposed to be representing in court. Linda was living her best life. She wasn't the greatest lawyer ever or anything, but she got regular clients and paid her bills on time. That was before she decided to dabble in the dark arts, like Grindelwald, but like without all the genocidal ambitions. When she was eventually caught by the authorities, Linda admitted to basically doing everything. She has had inappropriate contact with her clients multiple times, spoke to them about using illegal substances to get active in the bedroom, and one time she even rented a vehicle for a dealer who paid her in his product. She also admitted to being an extremely heavy user of illegal products. This led to her being disbarred in the state of Florida. The incredible thing is that this isn't Linda's first descent into the dark side. She's been arrested 5 times before. Once for driving under the influence, and 4 other times for vehicle registration issues. But none of those crimes are as serious as the ones she's now pled guilty to committing. The good news, we guess, is that Linda has managed to not get arrested since that incident and is hopefully now living a way better life. You never expect to hear about people who do all this work to become a lawyer and then build a successful practice only to throw it all away for nothing. Hopefully she stays on the right path. What are some of the most unbelievable crimes people will commit? Let's find out. Starting with number 6, fully brainwashed. Abigail Lee Kemp was sentenced to 10 years in prison for her role in a string of brazen robberies back in 2016. However, the story of how how her gang pulled these robberies off is a little weird, because Abigail didn't bother wearing a mask to cover her face. When details of the investigation began to leak, everyone realized that Abigail was a different sort of thief entirely. She must have thought she was invincible or something, because not only did she not wear a mask, but she also took very little precautions in covering her tracks. She used her own phone during the robberies and also used a relative's car as a getaway car. In fact, it was only way later that she even bothered painting the vehicle to disguise it. You're probably thinking that Abigail was some slick criminal mastermind who had a good plan. But no, you'd think there's no way someone would try to rob places without at least trying to hide their identity. That'd just be dumb. But as it turns out, Abigail was that dumb. The robberies were pretty simple. Abigail would waltz into a jewelry store with a weapon, force all the employees to the back of the store, secure them with zip ties, and then rob the store of the valuables it had. Then she would be gone as soon as she arrived. She pulled this off a total of 5 times, and prosecutors say she stole up to $4 million in jewelry. And of course, she had some help. She was taught to rob jewelry stores by 3 guys: Larry Bernard Gilmore, Louis Jones III, and Michael Bernard Gilmore. So Jones and the Gilmore brothers actually taught Abigail how to commit armed robbery. They taught her how to handle a weapon, what disguises to use, and even showed her what stores she should rob. They also helped with her surveillance and security outside the store. Unfortunately, Abigail was one of those people who hear you, but they don't listen. She didn't rob the stores with a disguise, and the police were able to get tips about her identity, and they even got her name. The fact that she often used the same getaway car owned by a relative, which was used to confirm her identity, really shows how little thought she put into this. In fact, the police caught Abigail when she walked into a jewelry store, and the store's manager thought she matched the description of the famed robber without a disguise. Police were called, and she was promptly arrested. Abigail was sentenced to 10 years, and she actually cried at her sentencing. Too bad. She should have thought about that before she decided to be bad at robbing places. Number 5. The fake baseball player. A criminal impersonating baseball player Trey Turner scammed an unnamed 70-year-old fan out of $50,000 through Facebook. The scam began when the victim, who's a longtime baseball fan, defended Turner online after a not-so-great game. That night, a Facebook account claiming to be Turner texted the woman, thanked her for her support, and told her to download Google Chat to continue the conversation. What this victim didn't know was that Google Chat is the app of choice for many overseas scammers who carry out romance scams. So she unknowingly downloaded the app, connected with this creep, and the messages got even weirder. As the two continued to chat, the imposter gradually started sharing personal details and photos of Turner's wife and family to convince his victim that he was the real deal. After about 3 weeks, the fake Turner then said he loved the woman. Of course, this sounded ridiculous to the 70-year-old victim, who knew she was decades older than Turner. Then, he eventually told her what he wanted. Apparently, fake Turner was having problems with his wife and needed some help to keep it quiet. And you guessed it, that help involved the victim sending money. Sadly, the woman somehow fell for his lies and started sending him small sums through different channels. For long, all added up to $50,000. And that is when the woman realized she had been scammed. The woman immediately went to the police and they started an investigation. Sadly, they realized that the scam was unlikely to be local and was probably the work of overseas scam artists. Thankfully, the victim got some of her money back and wasn't financially ruined like many victims of these types of scams are. And not to really come down on the victim here, but we're not entirely sure how someone can claim to be a longtime baseball fan and fall for this. If you don't follow sports, or if you're just peripherally aware and kind of follow a team, we'd understand. But Turner signed a $300 million contract in 2022, just 1 year before this scam, and it was pretty big news in the sports world. Someone who cared enough to go online and defend Turner after a game would probably know this, so it's a little weird that they'd believe he needed money. But denial is a powerful thing, and for whatever reason, she unfortunately did fall for it. We're just glad for her that it wasn't worse. Number 4. Blowing taxpayer money fast. Michael Lucchesi used his position as a top doctor at Sunny Medical Center in New York to steal over $1 million from public funding through unauthorized credit card use. According to prosecutors, Lucchesi Lucchesi lived a really pretty lavish life while he worked at the center, stealing roughly $1.5 million. The crazy thing was that he only got exposed because an audit was carried out after he retired from the center. When Lucchesi worked at Sunny, he held several important top positions, such as the chairman of emergency medicine, acting head of the hospital, and even the chief medical officer at one point. This was the pretext Lucchesi used to spend a fortune of the government's money on his personal worries. Lucchesi was entrusted with access to accounts with significant funds, and he used funds from those accounts to pay for things such as his pet care, travel, and even membership at the New York Sports Club. Prosecutors say that Lucchesi spent $176,000 on pet care, including paying for a luxury pet resort for his furry friend. He also paid $109,000 in membership fees at the New York Sports Club. He then paid out $115,000 in cash advances. He also spent around $348,000 on personal travel. But wait, there's more. The good doctor also spent $52,000 on catering and $46,000 for his children's tuition payments. There were also payments for liquor, flowers, and electronics. The shocking thing was that he stole so much in just 6 years when he had access to those accounts and no one noticed. Dr. Lucchesi couldn't get away with his crimes forever. An audit carried out after he retired revealed the massive scale of his fraud, and he'll have to explain his conduct in court. His lawyers didn't dispute the receipts of Lucchesi's spending, but they claim that the funds weren't stolen and something more complicated happened. As of the release of this video, Dr. Lucchesi has been charged with first and second degree grand larceny, first degree falsifying business records, third degree criminal tax fraud, and other criminal counts, and is awaiting his day in court. We guess we'll all just have to wait and see what extraordinary circumstances are going to justify stealing all that money. We're pretty sure his lawyers are working to come up with a pretty impressive, absurd excuse. Number 3. Reselling military gear. Jessica Smith, an Army veteran, was sentenced to 18 months in prison for stealing military equipment worth $2.1 million from Fort Hood in Texas. In addition to her prison sentence, she was ordered to pay nearly $1.3 million in restitution to the U.S. Army. Following her prison term, she'll also have 2 years of probation. But Smith doesn't have the means to pay the entire restitution up front, so the court ordered her to pay in installments. While in prison, she'll pay $25 per quarter. After her release, Smith will then be required to pay $250 per month, but at that rate, it would take her over 400 years to pay off the debt. Smith and her co-conspirators had decided to sneak into Fort Hood, break into some shipping containers, steal items such as scopes, night vision devices, and radios, and they were successful. When the military discovered that locks had been cut on 17 Connect shipping containers, they ordered an investigation. The investigation revealed that 72 scopes, 60 radios, 3 night vision devices, and 2 receiver transmitters had been stolen. These items were worth around $2.1 million. One investigator decided to search the internet to see if the items would turn up, and wouldn't you know it, they did. Somebody was trying to sell a thermal scope for sale on eBay for $4,500. The investigator matched the serial number on the thermal scope to the Fort Hood theft, and Smith was quickly apprehended. Her co-conspirators were caught as well. The investigators also reviewed security footage and found Smith entering the base on the night that the theft was carried out. It was an open and shut case, and Smith had no choice but to plead guilty. Number 2. The mayoral hopeful. In 2022, Whitfield Leland was a mayoral candidate for Tallahassee, and in 2024, he became a criminal robbing a Dollar General. Back in 2022, when Leland ran for office, he was a political unknown who came third in a 4-man primary race and only won about 5% of the votes. But his trajectory has gotten worse since then. The saga began when a witness saw Leland pull a weapon on the terrified manager of a dollar store. He then ransacked the register, stuffing all the cash in his pockets. Which, like, how much could that have been? $250? He told the manager to open the safe, but the safe was time delayed in order to discourage armed robberies. Leland then said he should have remembered that the safe had a delayed opening from the last time, which means this wasn't the first time he robbed that Dollar General, and that's a weird thing to admit, right? At that point, police had already arrived on the scene. Fortunately, Leland already had a genius plan to escape, which involved wearing an employee's shirt and leaving the store real casual like. And when the the police saw Leland in the shirt, they did think he was an employee, so his disguise was working. But then he took off running, and the police went after him. And Leland had so much cash in his pockets that it started comically falling out and made a trail that made it easy for the police to track him to where he was hiding in the woods. Leland is facing multiple charges for crimes, and as of the release of this video, Leland is still awaiting trial. The arrest adds to his previous legal troubles, including a prior conviction for resisting arrest in 2019. Crazy thing was that his escape plan seems like it would have worked if he had played it cool. You'd never expect a former mayoral candidate to rob a store, let alone a Dollar General of all things. But hey, Florida man is going to do Florida man things, right? Number 1, the naughty judge. Judge Dawn Gentry had the time of her life while she worked as a family court judge. She had illicit romps with underlings, ruled against attorneys who rejected her advances, and even let her staff drink in the courthouse. This is the story of one of the craziest judges you'll ever hear about. The complaints against Dawn Gentry generally concern a curious relationship she has with her case specialist, a man named Stephen Penrose. The complaints say that Gentry and Penrose and Gentry's secretary Aubrey engaged in physical intimacy at the same time in Gentry's office. There were even testimonies that people in the building at the time heard all the huffing and puffing inside the office. And to make things even more complicated, Gentry's ex-husband claims that Gentry was having an affair with Penrose while they were married. There were also claims that Gentry only hired Penrose after forcing another staffer, Meredith Smith, to resign. These complaints and other adjacent complaints of gross misconduct became so serious that the Kentucky Judicial Conduct Commission held a hearing to decide Judge Gentry's fate, and the testimonies at the hearing were shocking. When Aubrey, the secretary who was supposedly the third participant in this office romance, was called to the stand, she had an interesting story to tell. She claimed that she had heard about the rumors of her being intimate with Gentry and Penrose, so they decided that the best way to get rid of that rumor was to just play into it. Apparently accepting the rumors involved going into Gentry's office and moving the chairs and tables noisily so that people would think the three were being physically intimate. She also said that Penrose was making suggestive noises to that effect. Turning the whole thing into a prank is probably the worst way to dispel a rumor that people truly believe. But Aubrey said it was just to get tongues wagging and give them something to really talk about. But the list of Gentry's misconduct hardly stops there. She was also accused of ruling against attorneys who didn't give in to her demands, and one of those attorneys was Catherine Schultz. Ms. Schultz had a very interesting story to tell as well when she was called to testify against Gentry. She claimed that Gentry had propositioned her for, let's just call it a fun time with Penrose, an idea she refused. She said that Gentry texted her through Snapchat and asked her again and again to be involved intimately with her and Penrose. And even though Schultz declined several times, she persisted. Eventually, Schultz relented and kissed Gentry on one occasion. But when that didn't lead to the expected triple treat with Penrose, Gentry got angry and decided that she would rule against Schultz every time she had the chance. This threat made Schultz so anxious that she ended up in the ER and resigned from her position on some board she was serving on with Gentry. The crazy thing is these are just some of the complaints against Gentry. There are also suggestions that she ruled against attorneys who didn't donate the maximum amount to her election campaign. And people who work in the court premises say they've seen bottles of alcohol lying around Gentry's office as well. So what about Penrose? Well, he resigned from his position as case specialist shortly after the investigation was made public. Despite being subpoenaed, he refused to attend the hearing. At the end of its deliberations, the Judicial Conduct Commission unanimously agreed to remove Judge Gentry from her position. Her lawyers, of course, called this a miscarriage of justice and claimed that only the people who have the power to remove a judge from her position. Her lawyers claim that only the public should have that vote, but the decision of the Judicial Conduct Commission will stand for now, and we doubt anyone would argue with them. If even a tenth of these complaints are true, it seems like Judge Dawn Gentry shouldn't have ever been a judge at all, since it looks like she has some bad judgments. What are a few of the most crazy and almost unbelievable crimes people will commit? Let's find out. Starting with number 5. Getting rid of evidence. Zipporah Abraham attempted to use fake bills to steal $800 worth of stuff at her local Walmart. When police detained her, she tried to get out of trouble by eating the counterfeit cash. A Walmart loss prevention officer received an alert that Abraham had attempted to use fake cash at the checkout to pay for items. items. Surveillance cameras also showed her putting multiple items inside a storage bin, so it seems like her little plan wasn't going to work. Abraham was later seen pacing back and forth after the attempted use of counterfeit money, trying to find an opportunity to sneak the items out of the store. She was down, but not out, right? And despite Abraham's plucky can-do attitude, the loss prevention guys stopped her as she boldly walked past all points of sale without paying. That's when security discovered $864 worth of unpaid items in Abraham's storage bin. Security also noticed she had stored jewelry on her wrist and asked her to remove it before taking her into custody. Then, during the investigation, Abraham attempted to eat the counterfeit bills. You know, to get rid of the evidence, we think. Or maybe she just wanted some lunch money? She tried to eat roughly $200 of the fake cash. Police arrested Abraham and took her to a nearby correctional center where they set her bond at $10,000. During their investigation, Walmart employees discovered from the store's surveillance footage that Abraham had also attempted to steal from the store in the past. As of the release of this video, Abraham has been charged with third-degree grand theft and uttering forged bills, which is a really weird way of saying she knowingly tried to use forged bills. The thing is, as weird as this story was, you know that loss prevention guy probably has some even crazier stories. What's the wildest thing you've ever seen in a Walmart? Tell us in the comments below. Number 4. Mobster Melting Pot. MS-13 members and Russian mobsters have partnered up with shady surgeons, lawyers, and lenders to pull off personal injury lawsuits. This may sound like some sort of Nicolas Cage thriller, but no, it's real life. The operation involves pressuring migrants and desperate money-strapped New Yorkers into getting unnecessary procedures, such as spinal fusion surgeries, to boost the worth of their fake accident claims. MS-13 members regularly recruited migrants and homeless people who were in bad situations and were willing to risk their health for money. Participating doctors received cash after performing neck and back fusions, while fraudsters stole billions of dollars through fraudulent insurance filings. Their scam worked by targeting healthy people who seemed to have some sort of minor trip while walking down the street or at the construction site where they worked. The person then claimed to have suffered a debilitating injury that required numerous surgeries to fix. In response, a scamming surgeon would use screws and plates to fuse healthy vertebrae, which led to a lawsuit against a landlord, business, or sometimes both. Settlements started at a minimum of $1 million and were sometimes much higher, but the injured people would barely receive a fraction of that payment. They were getting around $1,000 most times. And having had to take out sky-high interest loans for medical and legal expenses, some of the injured people were just left with massive debt. The Russian side allegedly ran lending firms that founded trip-and-fall lawsuits and surgeries. They often offered extremely inflated rates to their settlement figures. Then, members of MS-13 supposedly would provide the necessary pipeline of migrants, some of whom went to New York with the intent of faking injuries. The gang also targeted unsuspecting border crossers and offered to drive them to the city, buy their meals, and give them spending money before forcing them into the scam. An MS-13 informant told the private investigator of plans for a worker to fall off a ladder. Later, the incident played out exactly how the informant said it would. The people running the operation trained migrants on how to act during the staged accidents. When someone was allegedly hurt, the scammers sent the person to a lawyer before a doctor. Rival gangs saw that the scam was so successful that they soon copied it. However, MS-13 didn't have the necessary experience in white-collar crime to pull off the scam alone, which is where the Russians came in. During the investigation, the NYPD discovered a building filled with lawyers, doctors, lenders, and physical therapists who were all involved in the scam. Insurance losses had grown so dramatically in New York since the COVID-19 pandemic that they were driving up the cost of living for the city's residents. While it seemed that law enforcement had done little to prevent these scams, one case they handled gave insight into how these operations worked. Manhattan surgeon Dr. Sadie Ribeiro received a 3-year prison sentence for performing unneeded back operations as part of an insurance scam. He received major payouts for the procedures. Another surgeon involved in the operation was Dr. Bolohan Okubadeo, known as Dr. Bo, performed unnecessary fusions to make money for himself. He performed neck and back fusions on people such as Edvaldo Nunez Oliveira, who didn't need either procedure. Dr. Bo's patients dealt with the long-term consequences of his actions, including extreme pain and discomfort. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, these fraudulent schemes continue to thrive, preying on the most vulnerable members of society. The partnership between Russian gangsters and MS-13 provided a seamless integration of resources and expertise, making it difficult for authorities to dismantle the operations entirely. However, the exposure of key players, such as Dr. Ribeiro and Dr. Bo, has brought some much-needed attention to these scams. Law enforcement agencies are now more vigilant, and ongoing investigations aim to curb these activities. Still, the complexity and scale of the network present significant challenges. It seems like the lesson here is to never, under any circumstances, associate with the mafia or gangs in any way. Once they get their hooks in you, it's game over. Number 3. Game over. Edward Kang became so stupidly angry with some online video game rival that he boarded a flight from New Jersey to Florida to go after his rival with a hammer. Kang told his mom he was going to visit a friend in Florida and boarded an overnight from Newark Liberty International Airport to Jacksonville International Airport. He checked into his hotel at 2 a.m. and the next morning he headed to an Ace Hardware outlet to purchase a hammer and a flashlight. Kang then threw on a mask, some gloves, and dressed in all black as he snuck into the victim's house in the early hours of the morning. He then went after his rival with the hammer, and the victim's calls for help awoke his stepfather. When the stepfather went to check on the victim, he found him on the ground, struggling to get away from Kang. Luckily, the stepfather and stepson duo managed to restrain Kang and waited for the police to arrive. Police, of course, arrested Kang and attended to his victim, who suffered non-life-threatening injuries. After he was arrested, Kang wasn't very cooperative with the police. During questioning, all he would say was that the victim was a bad person online, which kind of describes half the internet, right? Kang's anger apparently stemmed from an encounter with the victim while playing a game called Archage. We're sure the victim probably wasn't exactly being a little darling either, but the fact that a dispute over a video game of all things leads to this is ridiculous. Number 2. A lion romance. An unidentified woman climbed the barrier of the Bronx Zoo's lion exhibit, clutching roses and tossing money at the lions. And hey, lions are still really big cats at the end of the day, but this obviously wasn't a good idea. The woman wore a blonde wig, red dress, and a leopard print shawl and stood 15 feet away from the lion while speaking to it like a friend she hadn't seen in years. Some video caught her going on and on about how much she missed the lion. She even told the lion she came back for him and said how much she loved him. The act flipped out onlookers for obvious reasons, so they alerted staff about what the lady was doing. However, when employees got to the enclosure, she was gone. Although she was far closer to the lions than was recommended, which is to say, anytime a lion has direct access to you, you're probably too close. But that's just our opinion. A zoo spokesperson explained that she was in a planted area near the exhibit, but was never actually in the same space as the lion. Additionally, the spokesperson accused the woman of harassing the lions and having no consideration for her safety or the safety of the zoo's staff and guests. The zoo was working closely with its NYPD substation to investigate the situation. It wasn't the first time an incident like this occurred, and the public called on the zoo to improve its security. This lady, named Maya Autry, snuck past the barrier to the lion enclosure back in 2019 to taunt the lions, raising her arms and dancing. It didn't work. Instead, the lions just stared at her. A witness speculated that Autry was the woman behind this incident as well, which isn't crazy. Following the 2019 incident, Autry stood outside a courthouse and claimed her actions were for spiritual reasons. There's obviously some serious mental health stuff going on with this lady, so we hope she gets some help, and we're glad she wasn't mauled. Apparently, the lion wasn't even on its feet when she was in there. It was just lying down. Number 1. The unbelievable swap. Authorities discovered that this guy named Thabo Bester, a particularly vicious South African criminal, was living in a mansion with his celebrity doctor girlfriend a year after he had passed away in a maximum security prison. Obviously, his passing was a hoax, but it's weird that for a little while, it actually worked. Bester had earned himself a particularly nasty nickname. The name dealt with some non-consensual activities, and that he found his victims on Facebook and lured them into his home. And the public heard Bester had passed away after after his cell caught fire. From what we know about him, we're pretty sure nobody mourned this guy. But Dr. Nendifa Magudamana, his girlfriend and an actual medical doctor, which leaves us with just so many questions since she was well aware of who this guy was, helped break him out. The breakout operation involved sneaking a body into Bester's cell, then starting a fire to make it look like Bester was the one who passed. However, not long after, people started reporting sightings of Bester. Apparently, he was pretty well known in South Africa. After a year of reports from people claiming to see Bester walking among the living, authorities eventually ran DNA tests on the body, which revealed the hoax. Once law enforcement had confirmation that Bester was alive, they filed criminal charges against Magudamana and Bester, alongside Magudamana's father, Zolili Cornelius Sekalini, and former prison guard, Seno Ishmael Matsora. Bester was thrown in prison because of events that are too terrible to describe. The events led to the passing of his ex-girlfriend, Mamfundo Taihulu. As a result, he ended up with a life sentence, plus 75 years in 2012. He moved facilities in May of 2022 and saw this as the perfect opportunity to break out of the correctional center. In response to the prison break, lawmakers held a hearing to discuss the security failures that led to Bester's escape. So they grilled senior officials from the prison and G4S, the British private security company who were contracted to run it. Lawmakers were confident more people were involved in the operation due to its complexity. It was eventually discovered that an unauthorized vehicle brought a TV cabinet large enough to potentially hold a body into the correctional facility around 4 in the morning. Security guards at the gate also didn't search the car or the cabinet. Top prison officials also gave Bester his own cell, conveniently located next to a fire exit 3 days before his escape. Even more suspiciously, G4S claimed the prison security camera system went down around the time Bester snuck out. Hey, we're not Batman over here, but we think it's sounding like it was an inside job. Look at us cracking the case. 3 prison employees, including the 2 guards working in the security room and the night supervisor, ended up losing their jobs over the incident. Bester moved into Magudamana's Johannesburg mansion, where he drove luxury cars and allegedly ran a fake company that scammed businesses out of hundreds of dollars. Before the news of the jailbreak came to light, Magudamana was a well-known doctor and entrepreneur who had many followers on Instagram. In 2018, she was recognized as a top 200 young South African. Once the hoax was revealed, the couple fled the country, but authorities caught them in Tanzania and forced them back to South Africa to face criminal charges. They had several passports and were planning to cross the border into Kenya when they were arrested. As of the release of this video, Thabo Bester and his co-accused are facing significant legal repercussions. Bester himself, being all dramatic, requested capital punishment, claiming mistreatment and unfair legal proceedings. However, capital punishment is no longer practiced in South Africa, and Bester knew this, so basically he was just being dramatic. Bester, along with Dr. Nendifa Magudamana and now 11 others, face multiple charges, including fraud, corruption, arson, and violation of a corpse. The prosecution has prepared an extensive case with a 50-page indictment and a list of 132 witnesses. If convicted, Bester and his co-accused could face severe sentences, including lengthy prison terms for the various charges against them. We're really stuck on why Dr. Magudamana was so willing to sacrifice everything for this dude. She was already a successful doctor and was even more successful on social media. It's weird that she decided to throw it all away for the worst of the worst when it comes to criminals. And it was so much so that she roped her own father into it. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comment section which movie you think is better, Pulp Fiction or Forrest Gump.